I think it's such a minor, the change is what we asked for them, so if you want, we can go ahead with it. They did provide us with revised plans.
Right. They did as we requested, right? So.
Yeah, they did as we requested, moving the fence outside the 50, still encompassing the doorway. So, it's up to you. I didn't know they weren't coming tonight.
Yeah.
So, but I would recommend approval as shown on this revised plan. It's just a fence.
Mm-hmm. Any comments, commissioners, on this project? I'd like to go ahead and approve it if anybody doesn't have any objections to that. If it's, they did as we asked them to. They don't need to be represented.
They don't have to, no.
Right.
If it was a denial, I would say, and they weren't here, I'd say we should hold off. But if it's an approval, I think it's fine.
All right, so,
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve the, our request for determination of applicability for 3 Mockingbird Lane, map 73, parcel B233 fence, with a negative 3 determination.
have a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Unopposed, motion carries.
Can you send this along?
I'm gonna go ahead and call it the next one, because it's continued.
Good now.
The next request for determination of applicability is for the Crosby property, 481 Depot Road. Request to
No,
determine,
sorry.
will get continued, right?
Well, we still have to vote for Tribush to continue.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. All right, well, let's, all right, so we're continuing the Tribush hearing for 64 Depot Road. Proposal for addition, new deck, and minor grading. They've asked for continuance to December 19th, so I move that we accept that.
Second it.
Second it, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, next on the agenda is the Crosby request for determination of applicability. Request for 481 Depot Road, determine resource boundaries and if work is in the jurisdiction. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Paul Shea with Independent Environmental Consultants. Mr. Crosby is the property owner. This particular property is residential property, 481 Depot Street. Mr. Crosby had gotten a notification from Amy. We cut some trees on his property and wanted to take the stumps out. And the area where his trees are very close to the property line of Alan Hall's property, where, you know, which is in farming, it's under farming exemption. I just happened to have worked on Mr. Hall's property. Mr. Hall's actually here at this hearing. We've been working on it from 2015 till this time period. We did test holes on Mr. Hall's property in the area fairly close to where Mr. Crosby took the trees down, and he had a backhoe. We dug down like 4 feet, maybe even 5 feet. And this was in June, I think, of 2015, and the soil's completely dry, aerated soils. There's basically upland vegetation overtaking the old, it's basically an upland bog. He tried to grow cranberries there. If you stand on the property, it drops in elevation as you're going down towards the bike path. And he has one area in the lower elevations where he can get some cranberries to grow. And that area is easier to keep wet. But he's sort of abandoned up above. The only reason he even had an attempt to try it is he had to pump up water from the West Reservoir, 11 feet in elevation. It was coming up into his land to try to flood this upland bog area. So in reality, what we have here is close to where Mr. Crosby did the work on his property. Mr. Hall's property is an upland area. It has upland soils, aerated soils, doesn't have any wetland indicators within the soils. In the summertime, dry season, which is also in the growing season, about 4.5 feet down, dry soils, maybe even deeper, to a depth even greater, Mr. Hall can speak to. And then it's re-establishing itself with upland trees, pitch pines, other upland vegetation, because the wetland vegetation can't grow here. So the question here tonight for the board is we'd like to get a determination that Mr. Crosby's property is upland, and he's not within a 100-foot buffer zone of a wetland resource area, because Mr. Hall's property is not a wetland. And we're literally right on the property line between Crosby's land and Mr. Hall's land, where the trees were taken down. So there is no 100-foot buffer zone. It's not in jurisdiction. I believe there's some older documentation from the Harwich Conservation Commission when John Chatham was the conservation agent here, where at a conservation meeting, I know it was earlier, time frame, maybe going back to like 2004 or something, that it was called out that this area was not wetland, it's upland. So we filed an RDA application under the advice of Amy to try to get to the bottom of it, because basically there's no 100-foot buffer zone on his property at 481 Depot Street, and there's no biological wetland or state or town regulated wetland on Mr. Hall's property within that section of his land.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Do you have a summary, Amy?
Sure. It's not that I doubt you.
Okay.
At all. I just don't think you've given us the proof. We asked for wetland data sheets. Where were those test holes? The bog area is a fairly large area. Where were those test holes that were done? Where exactly were they done? If you say a part of the bog exhibits more, it's a greater ability to actually have cranberries versus this. If we issue a determination that it is essentially not a wetland, that can carry for the entire bog system. And that's not necessarily, I mean, we want to make
I think you'll find that will carry if he shuts off his pumping to the lower elevation bog.
Yep.
I think he called it Area A.
Yep.
In the report I did for him back in 2015, that area is going to dry up too.
I believe you. And I looked at the minutes from 2010,
Yep.
which is when Mr. Hall, and these were the ones that Mr. Crosby also, his office called and got. In 2010, Alan Hall got a determination of applicability that his activity, basically to rehabilitate the bog, was exempt because it was an agriculturally exempt activity. Right. Not by my reading of these minutes, not that the bog was not a wetland.
Well, and the property is under an agricultural exemption, Mr. Hall's property.
Correct.
However, he doesn't just have to grow cranberries there. So in the upper regions, and he can testify to that tonight, because it's such dry conditions within the it's upland, where we're talking about, he wants to try growing completely different crops that has nothing to do with wetlands.
Something that if you're asking us to determine whether or not this is a wetland and thus not being in jurisdiction of a wetland, we need proof of that. A word of saying it isn't enough. Where are those data sheets?
I can get data sheets to you that are just going to say nothing except that it's,
You're going to look at the vegetation type. There was water present in the ditches today. It vegetation type, you have to prove that you have predominance of upland vegetation. I'd be most interested in the vicinity of Mr. Crosby's property line with Mr. Hall's. I'm not doubting, but I just say...
Just for the record, that at the property line and I'll let Mr. Crosby speak to this, at the property line where the trees were cut that that he was asking to remove the stumps, he's done some test holes out there to show his land's upland. In fact, I think he actually removed, in some areas of his property, 2 feet of topsoil. When he moved in, dropped the elevation, would go down another couple of feet, completely dry, and his site's proving right next door is upland. I mean, I can give you some data sheets, but it's just gonna be a rough point, but I have to get permission from Mr. Hall to do the data sheets on his
Understood.
property. But if you,
I've just
I
never
think it might be
seen-
worth it for the commission to hear from Mr. Hall. He knows more about this land than anyone. He's grown up there, you know, his parents and his grandparents have owned that property a long time. I think you'd be well worth hearing about his property, because it's technically not a state wetland or a town wetland.
It is mapped as a state wetland.
It may be mapped as one, but it's not one. And I've seen
said-
that, I've seen that
no doubt.
before.
I have no doubt, I'm just saying, I've said what I,
Right,
want to say.
and I would tend to agree, we often want to see a wetlands delineation or some data to reference that.
I can't delineate a wetland that doesn't exist, so that's the
not a
problem with his job.
delineation, wetland, or data sheets that you would,
Well, and then if we can talk with Mr. Hall, because he's got to grant me permission to give that information on his land, because it's Mr. Crosby who's here sort of under, I guess, minor enforcement for working in a buffer zone that doesn't exist. It's
Right.
a little confusing
It's a
case.
dilemma.
Over a
Yeah,
year
no,
ago.
I understand.
it was well over a year ago as well. And that- So,
Well,
I've had conversations with everybody, with Mr. Hall and Mr. Crosby, and said, we just need the proof, we need these wetland data sheets.
Is Mr. Hall here tonight?
One of them. I'm Alan Hall.
Yep.
I'm referenced in this conversation. I want to clarify the record. I do not own the property. It's my father, Arthur H. Hall Sr.'s property.
Sorry.
It was my grandfather's. He bought it in 1962. It's been in the family since that time. Since that time, it's been in agricultural use. It's been in disrepair. As my grandfather got older, he died in 2006. And that's why we were before the town of Harwich Conservation to get a requested determination, because everybody was telling me that the bog was abandoned, you can't do this, can't do that. Well, we found that different. We were there actively every single day, 365 days a year, continuing the agriculture intent of that property. We made significant improvements over those times since my grandfather has passed away. Mr. Shea has been out there. We hired him as our own independent, and I've hired other wetland scientists also. And it's funny, I should put on the record that I've had 6 people there, and I've had 4 different opinions, and 2 the same. So this is a quagmire for myself, because I've grown up around cranberry bogs in the town of Harwich my whole life, my brothers, my mother, my father. You go on a cranberry bog, if you don't have water, you don't grow cranberries. You have to have good drainage. This bog is a very good bog because it is high and dry. You can get water to it. We have ample amount of water, that we have water rights to the West Reservoir. It was created for these cranberry bogs in 1929. You can pump the water up into it, and you can pull the boards out, just like a bathtub, and drain it completely down, because it's 11-foot higher topography from the reservoir, the man-made reservoir, which is actually higher than the old river back in 1929. So if the reservoir dam down at Johnson's Flume, if you pull those boards, that river would drop even further down. So it's quite a unique parcel of land. We love it. It's beautiful. Well, Mr. Crosby, he's a great neighbor. We have no problem with what he cut the trees there. It's kind of foolish, really, to be honest with you. Where his property line is a 22-foot access road around this cranberry land area. I'll call it cranberry land. And that's already disturbed. It's been a roadway there for years. The pine trees, they were a hazard. They had some widowmakers in them. The gentleman cut them down. There used to be several people that owned that property before Mr. Crosby, and they used it for pigs. They had gardens in the same location. I mean, I just, my own personal opinion, I think it's a waste of time. However, I do respect and I understand what the whole concept is about wetland delineations and setbacks, and that's why we've done our homework. I've had a farm plan that was submitted in 2010. Mr. Valentine was the selectman at that time. He endorsed us to keep this going because you all know cranberries are dying in the town of Harwich. We're one of the oldest families in this town that's been doing cranberries. And we say to ourselves, why are we continuing to do it? Because it's such a bad thing. You have the reservoir bog, can't make up a decision what we want to do. Great swamps out of cultivation. Several hundreds of acres in Harwich have gone down. We're trying to keep it alive. Mr. Shea said that I am looking at alternatives, trying to grow other commodities there. If cranberries aren't lucrative, maybe Christmas trees, maybe pick your own strawberries, maybe corn, something to keep it viable and keep it in the family and keep it going. this whole situation of wetland, not wetland, I can take a 580, what do we have? 590 case backhoe right behind where Mr. Crosby's is, and I don't know how many tons that weighs, and I can drive it over that all day long. Now, as you go further towards the reservoir, where I am cultivating the cranberries right now, you know, there is some peat out there, and that's what it was, probably an old cedar swamp years ago, back in 1850 or so. But out towards Depot Street behind Mr. Crosby's, there's a lot of hard pan there, clay, iron ore. If I drove the backhoe over where the cranberry vines are, I'd probably leave some ruts. But I'm driving the backhoe and behind Mr. Crosby's, no evidence of ruts. It's stable, it doesn't move. So, just from common sense, you know, that's all I can say. We have no issue with what Mr. Crosby's doing on his property. He wants to improve it like anybody else, like we want to, and keep it going. Yeah, if it's in agricultural use, he abuts a piece of land that's in agricultural use. I don't know how that all starts and stops at the delineation of a property line.
That's why we're here. It's, you know, we have to find out if it's jurisdictional or not. It's,
Thank
I
you,
think
thank
we all
you.
can agree it's a minor activity,
Mhm.
but we just have to figure out if it's jurisdictional. Amy's, what Amy was looking for seems to be fairly minor. Do you think you can produce any information like that that's already been collected or recorded?
Well, I'd probably go out and take a look at, you know, what's there today and just, I mean, I know what I'm gonna get. I mean, soil-wise, but I can just log it in, and I'm gonna concentrate on doing it towards where Mr. Hall's, I mean, Mr. Crosby's land, where he took the trees down. But because if you're out there, the interesting thing is that if you're in the lower portion of the wetland, I call it the A section, is the topography actually rises up gently and within this property. And then where Mr. Crosby's house is, you're at a very similar topographical elevation to where we have upland on Mr. Hall's property. And then Mr. Hall has built a new house directly adjacent to this area. And that also is, you know, same topographical area. So, I mean, no hitting of groundwater or anything with the construction. Everything's proving that it's upland. I'll go out there and do it, because technically with wetlands, all I need to go down is 20 inches, 22 inches for the test hole. If I don't have groundwater, if I don't have saturated soil conditions, it's not a wetland.
Isn't there a plant issue as well?
Well, I think what we're interested in whether, and we're not, I don't think we're arguing that the Crosby property itself is upland. It's
We know that.
the bog, whether the bog, in the bog ditches, is that,
Well, the ditches, again, the man-made ditch that ran along the edge of this upland bog next to Mr. Crosby's land, those ditches have had alterations, and people, so you'll get some breakdown of vegetation so that the soils look a little different than if you move over 3 feet into it. So that's not the place where I would do a test hole. I would do it in the typical area that's up there. With wetlands, it really comes down to one thing. It's like, I've been doing this since the 70s, and there was, back when Massachusetts was just using greater than 50% wetland vegetation, all the other states, I was working in Connecticut and Rhode Island, had switched to the whole thing about 3 parameters that you're looking for a wetland. But the bottom line is that hydrology is the driving force of a wetland. If I don't have the groundwater at that elevation of down 20 inches, 18 inches, I can't have hydric soils to sustain, to develop the hydric soils. I need the hydric soils to then allow the hydric or wetland vegetation to grow. It's really that simple. So, I mean, I know it can prove it relatively quickly that this site is upland, you know, and,
Outside of this site, has this come up before, Amy, where we were asking if a bog is a wetland in jurisdictional?
a lot of the wetland, trying to think in our time, there's been a lot that are kind of, have started a process but haven't come to the board. A lot of the bogs we have are wetland, more wetland bogs. Some are upland, some are wetland.
If I could make one last statement, is that the one thing with the cranberry bogs is that, for me anyways, this one's a very atypical situation. This is an upland bog that would never have had a cranberry growing here if Mr. Hall wasn't pumping up water 11 feet in elevation. I've never seen that before on another site. Your typical cranberry bogs in Harwich, Dennis, pick a town. It really doesn't matter. Truro, they're all over the place. If I'm out flagging wooded swamps, a lot of times I can see that the old cranberry, you know, you can see the embankment around the cranberry bog. That was once a cranberry, but it's now a wooded swamp. That's typically because you're putting a cranberry bog next to another water body, like an open pond, so they can take the water out for it. Everything's at that, the surface level of the pond is your groundwater table. We're 11 feet above it here. It's physically impossible for this to be a wetland. It defies all logic. But I'll get you some data sheets, you know, before I say that, I can't do it on his property, Mr. Crosby's. I have to do it on Mr. Hall's, and he has to give me permission.
One other thing too, I tend to think of things after I'm that kind of a person, but I just want to clarify what Mr. Shea said earlier on in his presentation. He talked about the bog that was growing currently, and then the rest of it was abandoned. It's not abandoned. I don't want that word to be termed here. It's not abandoned.
No.
Okay. One other thing for a point of order. In 2010, February 17th, when we went before the conservation, this was the farm plan that was submitted with my application for the determination. In this farm plan from the NRCS, it shows how we were going to renovate the cranberry bog area. And it showed it in phases, which we're currently in phase 1 still, just because of financials and ongoing things that go on in life. But it was our goal to do it in 3 phases. In the finger area that's directly behind Mr. Crosby's, you can see that it's shaded out, because that was going to be taken out of service and basically filled in, because we were going to take all the sharp edges that were out into the bog. There was points and islands, and we squared up all the dikes around the area, the perimeter. And they told me that through mitigation, if you take out upland, you can replace it or reuse it in another area. So it was our goal to take this out at that time anyhow. So therefore, it was submitted and it was discussed and approved with this plan, that wasn't going to be any sort of wetland, cranberry bog, if that's helpful.
Would that plan be helpful for you to document what you need to do?
It would be helpful, and I'll just go out and get some site-specific for what we need, because I don't want to be digging up his land down below of stuff that's in production for
No, you don't need
cranberries,
to.
as opposed to this particular area. I want to get my testing done right near where Mr. Crosby's property line and where the trees, you know, came down.
Yep, okay. Any questions on the commissioners?
I have questions. Maybe they're more for you, Amy, than anybody else, but I just, because you expressed concern, I thought I heard you express concern that if it was determined that the bog wasn't wetland, that would go for the whole bog. So I'm a little confused about this, and whether, basically, what Mr. Hall just said was there's an area of the bog, which seems to be the area in question, which they don't intend to ever use as a bog again.
Correct.
And so is it possible to just limit the conversation, limit the determination to
An
that
area.
area?
Correct.
Not confuse the issue by talking about what Mr. Hall is doing with the rest of the bog. I think that would make it a lot easier.
We would kind of need the limit,
Well, but how
yeah.
do you do that? How do you, I mean, how do we make sure that if we're saying, okay, go ahead, it's not a problem?
All
that
we need the
just
limit is
limiting-
for that
100
property
feet.
line area from Mr. Crosby's, where it
I
matches
mean,
in.
essentially, you just need to say there are no wetlands within 100 feet of this property.
Right.
However, we put it in the decision, this cannot be, this is not, does not count essentially for other potential area, I mean, without, because it's really just pertaining to whether or not Mr. Crosby's property is within the 100-foot buffer zone to a part of this bog. Whether that part of the bog is a wetland.
Correct.
We don't want to necessarily determine that the whole bog system is
No.
not wetland.
Well, that's why the application is for 481, and the only, where we're gonna do testing is right next to where he
Right.
did work. To really
Correct.
keep it isolated to that area.
I think it would come into in our decision that we would determine, if we were to determine that 481 is not within a wetland or within the 100-foot buffer zone to a wetland, However, we could say there may be, it has not yet been determined whether portions of the bog system are actually wetland or not.
Amy, it seems to me that they're going to have to test farther than the upland area in order to determine where the 100-foot buffer zone starts.
Not on, because we're not asking for Mr. Hall's property. We just want to make sure that it's basically within 100 feet.
Right, isn't that what you said?
Within 100 feet,
100 feet of what?
Mr. Crosby's.
Where the wetland part of the
No, I'm just
bog
saying that's where they would test to
Correct.
prove that it's, yeah, something like
Okay, so
that.
they have to go out 100 feet.
From the
Potentially.
from the activity.
From Mr. Crosby's property.
From the
Oh.
property line?
Well, we were gonna focus in on,
Yeah,
that's his,
near-
I think his
nearly.
western boundary.
Yep.
Within the area where he had taken the
Mhm.
trees down. We'll stick to that area of the property so everyone knows right where it is.
But you have to go 100 feet out.
I'm sorry, what?
You have to go 100 feet out.
Can't do that without Mr. Hall's permission.
Well, yeah.
That's his land, you know?
Right.
Okay, well,
May I just get some clarification, because I'm kind of confused? If we went before this Conservation Commission in 2010, and they gave me a -3 determination based on our plans, and this plan that was submitted, with this plan that's inside this plan,
Yep.
and it shows that this here was not even gonna be utilized or anything, why can't I go and fill that in tomorrow, and that's not even a wetland?
A -3 determination is, the wording is that it's within conservation jurisdiction, just that the activity's not gonna have an adverse impact.
And it
So
was
did the
because it was
commission-
agriculture, sorry, it was agriculture exempt, right?
Understood. So if, I don't have that right in front of me right now, so I'd have to take a look at it. But if did the commission determine, well, first of all, if it was agriculturally exempt and it was approved to do so, you could do that.
Right.
That is only valid for 3 years, that determination.
Right, but agricultural exemption is continually. That doesn't have a time limit, as long as you keep the intent of agriculture, and that's what we are doing. So if I continue tomorrow and
Yeah.
fill this in, Mr. Crosby doesn't even abut a wetland.
Correct.
I mean, you and I have spoken about whether or not you should just
And-
file for this.
And this, I don't want to file, because I've already filed, and this plan is in the records and across the hall somewhere that Mr. Chatham had. This book is in there, and it shows it. So if I've already been approved
Yeah.
through phases, there's no time limit on.
It's just tough, because we don't, like, all this
Wouldn't-
information exists, but
But wouldn't Mr. Hall, what he had approved back then, wouldn't that already be proven that it's upland and that
I
there
don't
shouldn't
have
be a
it here in
100-foot
front of me
buffer zone?
today. There's all this evidence that we don't have in front of us to consider that wasn't, I mean, I've talked with Alan numerous times, but it's just, if it's all here and we're all arguing about whether it is or isn't, why has it been given to the commission to consider?
Well, it has already in 2010. You'll just have to go back in the files and look at what was done.
And I have no problem
excuse
doing
me,
that.
can I just ask Mr. Hall a question?
Sure.
Would you have any objection to your neighbor coming in 100 feet from the property line and doing some test holes to determine whether that's wetland or not?
I don't think we need to, because I've
No, that
already,
wasn't my question, whether it's required. I'm asking you if you would object.
I'd have to talk to the family about that.
I see. So that's the complication. You're not
I'm not the approval
ready
factor.
to, and presumably you have already had this conversation.
Sort of.
Well, I'm just trying to clarify what was submitted with us. I guess we're the person, we're the elephant in the room. We're the room. We're the people that have the so-called area. So I've already been down this road, and I don't see why Mr. Crosby has to go down this road.
I guess what happened, you applied to do a certain activity, and the commission determined that it was jurisdictional, but there was no impact. But what you applied for was different from what happened here at the Crosby property, so it is two different things. And I think the information you have would be useful for them to consider.
Right.
And probably help him to where he needs to go.
Right.
So I think there's a lot more process here than there needs to be, I think. His activity should be approvable, and we just have to determine if it's jurisdictional or not, so, would you, I mean, the outcome, Amy, what would the outcome be? Would it be a -3? Would there be a fine? I mean, what would the possible outcome be to, this activity?
I mean, there was no fine, it was just a stop work.
Could I throw something on the table?
So just be an
I'm
approval.
just answering his question.
It would just be an approval, right?
Well, it would be an approval, there would be a determination. If it's upland, then it's an approval. And then Mr. Crosby, who's expressed ideas to me in the past when this all happened of what he'd like to do to his property, then he wouldn't have to file a notice of intent or application to do such things. If you found that it was wetland, then it would make him have to file for activities that he wanted to do within the buffer zone.
So I'd say it's really a good process to go ahead and figure this out for your future use. It seems like a lot, but I think it's necessary.
I think we've required it for everybody else to determine whether, I mean, it's just actual data, even if it's just test holes, actual data.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so if I just present this, that we have land in agricultural use, does that help at all? I mean,
It's a
what benefit, I mean,
I think
it's
it's
already
a-
disturbed all the way up to his property line from our side. We already utilize that, so I mean, the setbacks, if he was gonna build a building, the setback from the property line anyhow, so he's already beyond whatever technical setbacks there are for wetlands, if it was a wetland. I don't understand. And I would ask, what would be, if we did entertain the fact of going out there and doing test holes, how many, what is it, you know, where are they, who's paying for it, and all of these things.
I personally understand the purpose of the board and the committee being to protect conservation and wetlands through the town of Harwich. However, this being not only privately owned land, I think it's very unfortunate for me to even try to be a good neighbor and want to say to, hey, Alan, can I come over and dig some holes in your property? You know, I mean, it's like my dog going on yours and digging a hole and leaving a bone in the water. The fact is, it's his land. It's his family's land. The fact is that this is my land. We have no issues with what we're doing, and nothing I'm doing is disturbing what he's trying to do in his property. You know, so I feel, for me, just as an individual, I feel it's difficult that a committee or a commission would force a neighbor to go on someone else's property to determine his own future with the use of his own property, especially when the individual's here testing on my behalf. I mean, that to me is, and we're all well aware that this is 11 feet. 11 feet. We're not talking 28, we're 11 feet above the water line and the water table. I mean, I'm just saying, I think this is a lot of, hey, tizzy push back and forth to really get to what everybody in the room's trying to accomplish. And the fact is it's his land. He should be able to do what he wants with it. It's my land. He does what he wants, and I'm like to do what I want without cutting a tree down and being, hey, you can't cut that tree down. The tree was a widowmaker. I have 2 kids at home. Then I'm being told I can't do this, or I got a stump on my property I can't pull. Anything that I do, I talk to my neighbor before I do it anyway. It's not like we're here battling out with any idea. We know that property, what it stands for. So I think a lot of this is just arbitrary at this point, just my opinion.
Could I make a suggestion? I mean, Mr. Hall's land in the area that we're talking about testing is in agricultural exemption, and he has that farm status. On Mr. Crosby's, we're talking about, is it 3 trees?
It
Two
was
trees.
in the 100-foot buffer zone.
Yeah.
It was 2 trees that I took down.
2 trees
removed.
that he's taken down. So
And there
we
was
don't,
an invasive species that we moved out of the tree. That was it.
what if,
Yeah, there was land cleared.
yeah, you're right. What if we, instead of doing the test holes to get some sort of determination which may affect Mr. Hall and all, what if he just replants 2 or 3 trees within that section of the property? As like restoration for the tree, the widowmakers that he took down.
Yeah, I mean, the violation was such a long time ago, it's not even, the only thing it was there's no enforcement to have to correct that. It was if you wanted to do future activity, then you had to file, which is what you're doing. So
Correct.
the enforcement has long since, this is like 2 years ago.
Yeah, a year and a half, yeah. It was a while ago. But I got these 2 massive tree stumps where I park, and I can't, I was told that I can't pull them. They have to stay. And then it was like, wait a minute, so if I want to remove this tree here so I can plant a border along my property, along Mr. Hall's, I have to go and have a conservation meeting. If I want to plant grass, I have to have a conservation meeting. If I want to go extend the fence that's on my property line that I installed back in 2008, oh, I have to go for a conservation meeting. So for me, I started looking at the big picture, and I went, well, I talked to my neighbor, and we had a conversation. He explained his position in the past in his property, and I sit here before you today saying the same thing I did before. Every time I'm trying to put some sort of activity of simple use on my own land, I don't want to have to come before a board and sit here going, oh, well, but in order to do that, you gotta go to your neighbor's property and dig test holes. To me, I don't feel like that's very fair of a board to say to my neighbor.
Yeah, I
Without proof, without
Is that,
evidence, I don't know how we can determine.
Right, I can fully understand how you feel. It makes a lot of sense.
Sure.
To think of it just the way you do, but in every case, somebody has to demonstrate their separation from resource areas. It happens with
even it being proven and documented in 2010 that wasn't the resource, and Mr. Allen saying that he can put, 2 feet of soil on his land right now, and it's still not a resource? I mean, I understand the proof and intent, but
Yeah. Right.
with things like that, this seems to be a little bit more of a literally bogged in situation where there's a lot more exceptions, or it's a lot less, less typical than the normal standards you see.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Well, evidence to support the case needs to be submitted with application. It's not fair to the commission to have to vote on something literally like that they're hearing at the time of the meeting. So the commission, if there's information the commission is to review, it should be submitted prior, much prior. I mean, we have submittal deadlines to the meeting.
But again, you're asking me to go to my neighbor.
Right.
And
That's the problem.
tell him what I need to do on his property to submit to the commission when it's not my property.
You're asking the commission for this relief.
In the sense of, I don't have the right or the jurisdiction to go to my neighbor's
Same.
property. I mean, so I have to come to the commission and say, this is what's going on, this is the evidence that we do have, this is what we do know, this is what we've shared, and this is where we stand.
And the one complication is that the information that Mr. Hall has on his property is that the particular section of upland that we're talking about was in the past already determined by the conservation not to be wetland.
Well, I can't say if it was definitely determined not to be wetland. It was determined to be agriculturally exempt.
It's physically impossible for it to be a wetland.
I'm just asking for proof.
Without the data, without the proof, the observation is there's a bank, a ditch with water in it. So from a physical view, how would I say
Because
it's not a wetland?
the ditch is just holding up, it's probably got some,
We're just
Right,
talking for
I
data.
understand, right.
I think that's the point.
well, we're back to then
So if you
getting permission
can't
from
prove
Mr.
it,
Hall.
then I guess the rationale would be that is from the wetland boundary, unless you can determine it's not.
Typically, if you have a
Correct.
wetland bog, if you do truly have a wetland bog, the edge of wetland is typically the ditch or the bank just
Right.
at the edge of the ditch. That's usually where your 100-foot buffer zone starts.
Right, and that's my point. Without proving differently, that's where the measurement would go from.
If you had a wetland bog, a real wetland bog, I'm from Plymouth, Makepeace country, they're all around my house. Right now, groundwater elevations are at the surface level in those bogs. How's that area look like right now?
Like a field. And then the ditch, the upland perimeter ditch is just full because we've had a lot of rain. And I've got one board in the flume. If I pull that board, that water will go.
If it was a true bog, we'd have water all the surface. You could drive by and look at it, it's gonna look like a small pond. We don't have that here.
Amy, if it is agriculturally exempt from conservation,
For Allen, for the Hall family.
for the Hall family,
That's it.
that's it. It's not on all four sides of an
Agriculturally exempt doesn't mean it's not a wetland. It means it could or couldn't, depending on the situation, it is or it isn't. But typically agriculturally exempt means, okay, the agriculture and the activities surrounding agriculture, buildings, what have you, road, the bog road, those are exempt activities under the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act for that owner.
So the agricultural status of that bog really has no effect on neighboring properties?
Only if it was determined to not be a wetland.
So I want to reiterate something Amy has said several times, which is we need proof. And you're making contradictory statements by saying that you won't go onto your neighbor's property, but you continue to turn around and refer to your neighbor and ask your neighbor about the conditions. So the proof, and your neighbor is saying that he has records, but we don't have the records. And I think that the burden is on you to provide us with proof. And if you think the proof is in the historical record, then the burden is on you to find the historical record and bring it to us, because I don't know where I'm gonna get the historical record. I don't have
Well,
any of this reference information.
I'll look and see what we have.
I would assume it would be in the
And I'm
file.
not saying that I have any notion at this point whether the historical record is gonna prove anything for us, but the burden of proof is still on you. It's not on us to just go by your hearsay, which is all I have right now, is hearsay.
Amy, does it make sense to have you work with Mr. Crosby, Mr. Shea, to try to look at what's in our files
I'm happy to.
and just
I
see
mean,
if we can
that's
come up with some
always been-
documentation? Because the end point is we're gonna approve the RDA, if it's jurisdictional.
Yeah.
If it's not, then it's not our business.
Right.
But if you wanna do some future work, it'd be really beneficial to figure this out. So if that makes sense, I think
Yep.
that's probably the best way to go. Any other comments from commissioners?
Is the ditch itself considered a wetland? It's over,
It would depend on the bog itself,
yeah.
the bog.
Okay.
Ditches can be moved,
Right,
relocated.
right.
Okay,
It's
well,
more the condition of, more so it would be determined by the bog itself,
The bog's always looked very dry.
Mhm.
So I guess I'll ask for a continuance in your patience to work together. I think, the outcome's gonna be favorable. It's just, we
Yeah.
need to, I think, for any case that comes before us, we have to figure out whether it's jurisdictional. And this is, this isn't much different, even though it seems like it's a lot of process. So should we continue to,
The 19th is the next available date. We'd need information within the week, or we could do January 2nd.
Push the January.
How about January 2nd?
okay. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your time. Then I move we continue this hearing till January 2nd.
A second?
Second, yeah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next we have a request for determination of applicability for the T-Bear property at 184 John Joseph Road. It's an upgraded septic system. Anybody here
Not a
tonight?
Lynn Hamlin, no. Oh, I was like, I thought I saw her somewhere.
Is this for Tibbet?
Your T-Bear, yeah.
Is it pronounced T-Bear or?
I probably have been mispronouncing it.
I-
I've been pronouncing it Tibbet, but.
Thank you.
All right, well, this one should be easy. This is simply for a septic system. They're doing a voluntary upgrade. Resource area is a BVW adjacent to John Joseph Pond. It's going where it has to go to maximize the setback from the wetland resource area. They are pushing it up against the front property line to increase that setback as much as possible. The current system is a cesspool that then goes to a leach pit that will be pumped and abandoned or removed as necessary. And the new system will give you 5 feet minimum vertical separation between adjusted groundwater and the bottom of the SAS. They can come in right against the street. We have a work limit line. This will have to go to Board of Health. I'll keep it short and sweet.
Thank you. Any comments, Amy?
Keep it short, too. This is the kind of farthest away it can possibly get from the resource area. It's a replacement of a cesspool with a Title V system, and they're not increasing flow or anything like that. It's only a one-bedroom dwelling, and I would recommend approval with a -3.
Thanks, Amy. Any comments, starting with you, John?
I agree with Amy.
Stan? Jim?
No comment.
Could we have a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve the upgrade of the septic system at 184 John Joseph Road with the -3 determination.
I second it.
Second by Stan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna send this along, okay, for signature? We get into the notices?
So next, we have a notice of intent from the town of Harwich to do treatment, alum treatment at Hinckley's Pond. It's a continued hearing. I think tonight we're just gonna receive a little more information. Is that where we
Yeah.
are?
Well, I asked Heinz if he'd be able to come, because I think the commission still has some questions, and we did get some feedback from the Natural Heritage Program, which Heinz is responding to, but I would hope that the next meeting, we have more information from Heritage, a final letter, but I think, based on your emails and such to me and discussion, I think that people still have some questions, so I asked Heinz to come tonight.
Good evening, Heinz Proff, Natural Resources Director. I was here, I'm guessing 6 weeks ago, or roughly then. At that point, we had submitted to the National Heritage and Endangered Species Program the plan for the inactivation of the phosphorus in Hinckley's Pond. We did hear back from them. They had some more specific questions, and it dealt with things like the specific dosage that we would use, kind of the mixing method, time of year. Because what I'd given them was the evaluation, and we're still in the midst of writing our draft, and hopefully then a final RFP for the treatment. So, there's no way that there would be a vote taken tonight based upon not hearing yet from them completely. They had some other questions on, the depth at which the pond is at, the depth at which it would be treated. The nice thing about that is, treating at a depth of greater than 12 feet and deeper, we're clearly not near the edge. They also asked about the kind of mixing that occurs and how it happens 2 or 3 meters below the surface, and time of year, and things that we're trying to avoid, such as the herring run in the spring. And we'd prefer water temperature that's greater than 40 degrees for a better reaction. So those are the things that they have in their hands. I don't know how much longer they'll take. I know the 19th, it's kind of a target date to have, and then there's possibly January 2nd. We're not in that big of a rush in terms of getting that RFP out, because of the application won't take place probably till late spring, if not then possibly fall, because of the time of year restriction, temperature, and, from the get-go, we've always said we wanted to do it correctly, meaning dotting all the i's and crossing the t's. And that's what drove really the original June resampling of Hinckley's Pond. I wanted to be certain that we were dosing all that we needed, and in fact, it came back with a number which was adequate, and they suggested possibly more, but I was conservative and went with that lower amount, just for the fact that, based upon the most current data, we were going forward with the correct plan, based upon that evaluation that was done by the town, that they spent $30,000 on to come up with the recommended treatment for Hinckley's Pond. So that's kind of the update since the last, really 6 weeks.
So Heinz, was a detailed plan produced? I know Natural Heritage asked for a plan.
Yep, they
So
got that.
You submitted?
Yeah, did that.
Have we seen that? Has the commission seen that?
Was it the RFP?
Yeah, it was the draft RFP.
I'll get that too. I think you may have had it at the very beginning.
You had it at the very beginning.
before it was even a notice of intent yet. It was one of those things like a prep for you, but I'll
Yeah.
resend it.
I recall receiving that 2012 valuation report.
Okay, yeah.
So
but,
I don't think we've seen a narrative or
I
a
would-
detailed plan.
When you do look at that draft RFP, I don't know if it's something that you would even focus on, but the exact cost would be, there's variability in there, and there are dates in there that are initially targeted this fall, so don't worry about those dates. But you want to look over the treatment, the dosage, the sampling, the background, the buffering taking place, the way it's applied. That'll still be consistent, but the exact bid amounts and when they'll have to have something submitted to us by, and how much will be used for contingency and monitoring, costs like that are still flexible. But that's why it's a draft RMP, but you'll get what you need if you haven't already gotten it at one time.
Yeah, we haven't.
Oh, well, if you, I'm sure Amy
I
helped
will
work on
resend
it.
it.
Yeah, okay. Well,
This-
yeah, we haven't, we didn't receive the detailed plan that Natural Heritage asked for, right?
No, basically, if you want to provide, if you would do me a favor, aside from the RFP, whatever information you gave to Heritage, if you would forward it to me.
I did that.
Oh, you
I
did?
copied
Okay.
you in those emails.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So, that's in response to this email, the information you
Mhm.
sent to them?
Yep, this was what Heritage came back with to Heinz.
And that was a week ago or so.
Yeah.
Yep.
I responded directly to their email with specific answers, and then I gave them the whole RFP so they could get even more into it, and asked if they needed anything to call or email. I have not gotten anything back yet.
So I'm confused about what you're referring to as the RFP, because I
Re-
think we saw some narrative like in the summer. And is that the
Yeah.
draft RFP you're talking
There
about? It
was-
looked very preliminary, very draftish. What didn't look like a formal RFP at all to me.
It was August when we had that. There were a couple town forms that were added, but it didn't change any of the narrative or the descriptive portion of that. The original, the dosage hasn't changed, anything, so
It
that
There
was-
was dosage in the
Yeah,
RFP?
Yeah.
it was the
No,
request for
I've never seen that.
proposals. It was a draft request for proposals. It wasn't, it still hasn't gone out.
Yeah.
It's still in draft form.
All right, well, maybe tonight we could limit our questions. We've got Heinz here, so we can ask him some questions.
Sure.
But until we see that plan, I don't think we should spend a lot of time
Okay.
on this,
Yeah.
because I think we should also review that. And from my end, I think I've been doing some research, and the one thing I want to work on at the next hearing is just monitoring concepts.
Okay.
How are we going to monitor, post-treatment results if this isn't?
There's actually, yeah, there's also there's post-treatment, but there's also during the treatment monitoring that takes place as well.
Yep, so, all right, well, yes, let's try to have, some comments, but save them for after we review
Yeah, if
that
not, I
detailed
can
plan.
forward them.
Some comments. You want to start, John?
Yeah, at this point, I don't have a lot. I guess you just brought up the post-treatment thing. I don't know whether you're prepared to talk about that at all tonight, whether that's part of the RFP, or if you consider that to be a separate activity.
Yeah, I can make it a short answer. Hinckley's Pond has been sampled for over a decade with its water sampling program that we currently have. That will continue at a minimum, but because of this deactivation that takes place, I foresee then additional benthic samples taken
Yeah.
after treatment. Because we have prior to it, and we have as recent as June, and it would be prudent to go right back after the treatment and see what we have. So that'll be,
Can you clarify, though, when you say additional benthic samples?
okay, all right. So these are the samples that you go down with a grab and actually collect bottom samples, put it in a jar, and determine what the concentration of phosphorus is, which you're trying to deactivate. Which the water sampling program does not do that. We do temperature, not salinity, temperature, dissolved oxygen, clarity with a Secchi disc. We look for nitrogen, phosphorus in the water column. But the deactivation of alum will bind it to the bottom. We did take samples for that, for the evaluation. We took additional samples this past June. Post-monitoring, I would see that occurring at a minimum, in addition to the current water sampling program that Hinckley's Pond will still be part of,
What about biological sampling?
such as,
Talking about flora and fauna.
'cause
Flora and fauna, like?
in water that's deeper than 12 feet where it's mud, there's very little to begin with. We could do that. But the treatment of 12 feet or deeper within the pond is not going to affect any of the shoreline distance benthic. I mean, Division of Fisheries will be well aware of in case that they want to, while the application's taking place. But if there's something specific that you want looked at, we could certainly add that.
So in the sampling, in all the sampling data that's been collected for Hinckley's and other ponds in Harwich and on the
Yeah.
Cape, I suppose, there is chlorophyll sampling, for example.
Correct.
And is
Correct.
that part of the plan?
Well, that
And
chlorophyll's,
what about,
Or the water.
I mean, and I would maybe defer to you, Brad, in terms of other potential biological impacts that should be considered in post-treatment sampling. And I don't have any particular suggestions
Yeah.
about how to deal with that. You know, the reason I bring this up is I think there are, you know, regardless of what the merits of what they
Sure.
are, there are ongoing concerns about treatment with aluminum, with alum, and to me, this is an opportunity to take data and observe in detail what the response of the whole pond system is to the treatment of alum. And without taking data, without observing closely and making sure we know what went on as a result of this, it continues to be an unknown. And it seems to me that it's our responsibility to make sure that we really understand what the effects of the alum treatment are.
that's been documented. It's been successful in other ponds on the Cape. It's successful in Long Pond. It's a water quality program, so it's not an overall pond evaluation, which is where the $30,000 bill came in. That's something that could be discussed. But things like chlorophyll, phosphorus, nitrogen, that will be continued to be sampled. And I
And
think
the
I
health
mentioned
of the
in the last meeting.
wildlife in the pond.
Sure, it's a big, in fact, if we don't do anything at all, we're putting that stuff at risk.
I think we'll work with you
Sure.
definitely at the next hearing to try to develop some concrete monitoring. I'd like to see a higher frequency of the pond sampling that is done with the present program immediately after the
Yeah.
application. And
I
so
support that as well.
we'll work with you on that. For biological monitoring, you know, you want to document if there's any type of a mortality event. That would be a requirement.
Yep.
And recent applications have not had mortality events for fish and other types of wildlife, so that's a good thing. But I think we would certainly want them to document any occurrence of anything that
Yeah.
dies.
And that'll be in the RFP, you'll see that.
Right, and we can talk about if there's any benthic sampling that might be useful. I think getting some higher frequency water chemistry information would be useful to document, hopefully, that the response is quick, that it dissipates.
Right.
Any water column impacts dissipate quickly.
It's like a light switch, yeah.
So
It's
I
immediate.
think that's what I'll be looking to do when we have a little more information, so. Any thoughts, Mark?
One quick general question. Oldest application in our area, do you happen to know where that is?
There's a paper that was sent out, I don't know, at one point, and it has the history of treatments on Cape Cod ponds and lakes, and it will be in there. Long Pond is a more recent one. There are older ones than that, and it'll be, I don't have it memorized, but it'll be in that material, years applied.
I looked at it, I just didn't know.
Yeah, it'll be in the app, and they'll have years in there when they were treated. And I think I mentioned at the last 6 weeks that, you know, this type of treatment has been done in drinking water reservoirs, which Hinckley's Pond is not. So again, in terms of conservation or making it, you know, as safe as possible. Nothing is, you know, 100%, you know, without some sort of, but they can be managed, those things.
It was either Hamlin Pond or Mystic in Barnstable was one of the oldest ones where there was a fish kill.
Right, and since then, a lot's changed, like you said, the
Right, that's what I was
efficiency.
getting at.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
brought the pH down too quickly, and it
Yep.
resulted in an immediate
That was
fish
one of the
kill.
Yep.
very
Fish was
first ones.
seen. So if you do screw up the application that way, you'll see things dead right away.
In application in the RFP, it talks about that RFP, or the pH buffer in there, the 6.5 to 7, which is a neutral
Yep.
application.
You know, as a credit to the industry, I don't believe they've had a
Nope.
mortality event like that since then. So they've really responded. But I do agree, it's our responsibility to get some information out of this and document it with better chemistry data.
Yeah, they'll be used for further studies and further ponds.
Carolyn?
When it was done to Long Pond?
Yep.
Did anybody take documentation on it?
There is data, because it was shared between towns of Brewster and Harwich, and then I think I sent a link about the Brewster website where they have a study on Long Pond. After what's specifically in there, I don't know, but we haven't had any fish kills, water clarity's been good, dissolved oxygen's good, the fish have been migrating in and out, so we haven't had
I'll resend it.
we had a fish kill prior to that application.
Yeah.
And we haven't had it since then.
I would
So
s-
we
say-
have Long Pond as an example
right next door.
to show the success of this type of treatment.
I think we all understand that there were great improvements, but I think the documentation isn't really there because the frequency of sampling was too sparse. And so I would say the sampling wasn't adequate to show what happened. But I think anecdotally, we're all
Oh,
quite happy with
absolutely, yeah.
what happened at Long
And
Pond.
interesting, and I think I handed out this before, I can do it again, it's not a last minute, but it talks about that, you know, the internal load of Hinckley's, that phosphorus is the big thing that we're doing, but also the next step up from that would be water flow from Long Pond
Pond.
becomes the next one. Well, that was treated, so that we're already like at step 1 and 2, that water coming in has already been treated, so Hinckley should react even better.
May I ask a quick follow-up question about the Hinckley versus Long? Based on my recollection, the concentration of what was added to Long Pond was much less than what's being proposed for Hinckley. I'd have to check, but I'm just curious, I mean, there's different ponds, different characteristics. I'd just be interested in why there was such a, because I remembered it being like 108 or whatever we're doing
Yeah.
to like 40-something.
Yeah, it's
I'm
one
just
of,
curious about why.
yeah, no, it's just what's in the muck, but
Yeah.
it would be a higher dose than took place, but it's still
Mhm.
within the realm of,
Sure.
of applications. There was a thought of 137, but 108 is adequate, and adequate was good enough for me
Yep.
in terms of, what you're looking at saving some cost and maybe extending, you know, extra years, maybe 25 to 30 years instead of the 2025, but I would err on the side of safety.
What was the number in Long Pond? So
I don't have
I'll get it for you, I do have
remember
it.
At one point, hearing 700%, which seemed kind of extreme. So it'd be,
No,
it'd be
yeah.
good to know that.
Yeah, the treatment is usually in grams per meter squared. Grams per meter squared.
So you submitted the last time we talked, I remember there was some data and the numbers.
Yeah.
I don't remember the specifics, but yeah, it was crazy out of line compared to what Long Pond was.
Yeah, I think it was 700%. It was. But I can't remember the exact numbers, and that just. seemed like
70
a-
might sound, 70
Seven-
milligrams per, because we're at
70
108,
Yeah.
40 and, I'm just putting two numbers together, the 40 and the 70
Right.
is 108.
That sounds
Yeah.
reasonable, but.
There have been treatments up to 200 in ponds,
Right.
so we're, you know.
But after a certain point, it's no.
If I may, I haven't looked at the numbers, but it's I think when you look at it, it'd be a relatively easy mathematical,
Yeah.
because it's a one-to-one stoichiochemical reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming they've measured the amount of phosphorus in the pond, the volume, so they know how much, and so they'll add, if X amount of phosphorus, they'll add X amount of the lumen, the sodium, to react with it. Because it's not a complicated chemical reaction, it's precipitate, it just drops out.
Right.
So I have to look at the numbers, but I think the change of this, I think they just look at we have to look at the water data and just see where it is.
Thank you, Larry. Board of Selectmen liaison and chemistry liaison as well.
Yeah.
That's great. Stan,
No, not questions at this point.
Jim, any more?
Yeah, I just had a couple things regarding the reducing of the input. So does it seem like the majority of the phosphorus came from the cranberry bogs
No,
at this point?
the majority is the internal, where it originally came from, it's over decades and 100 years, deterioration or detritus going to the bottom. The bog input as of was, it's like 9%, something like 7% of the input. 7%, I have that here. So that's the top chart, you'll see, it's 7% input. Where that goes. This is part of that evaluation, it's just the colors. He's referring to that top chart, where that internal load is what they're after, that big green
Thank
piece,
you.
that's what they're trying to address first.
This is where the loads
The
are.
Yeah, on the top,
presently-
yeah, and then what would it be afterwards? And afterwards, the second, that's the bottom one, I think it's a cranberry color, it talks about water flow from Long Pond, would be the greatest input, which has already been treated, so,
It would still be the greatest input.
So to clarify, these were done after Long Pond was treated or
Yeah,
before?
oh, yeah.
These apply, these
So that-
percentages for Long Pond apply to Long Pond as treated.
The chart refers to the percentages in Hinckley's Pond at the time of the study. The time of the study was after Long Pond was treated. What they're saying is after Hinckley's is treated, where you're gonna be getting input is the bottom picture, and the greatest piece of the pie in the bottom picture is what you're getting. Doesn't say concentration, it's just percent of input from those, all other areas.
Any more questions for
I
Heinz?
just have one other that I think I asked you when you were here last, Heinz, which is, what about the stormwater contribution and what is being done about
Yeah.
that? It's a smaller
Yeah.
amount, but in the long run, like you say, after the thing is treated, it becomes a bigger piece of the pie.
Yeah,
And it seems like it would be easy to address, and shouldn't that be addressed along with the treatment in order to prolong
Yeah.
the effectiveness
Yeah,
of the
I think-
treatment?
Yeah, I think I remember responding to that you can see it's still the same percentage, it's still 6% in both. I think I responded, and I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, it's the hood ornament on a car. It's something that can be addressed with highway department, roads that are being either repaved or runoff in different directions, or stormwater. The town has, I don't know, remember, it's like something S4, I've worked with Bob Caffarelli, it's going through all, not just around Hinckley. Addressing all stormwater basins to upgrade them. So, yeah, that would extend the successful duration of the treatment, so.
I would think that a large component of the stormwater that's getting in there was coming actually from the tech school, which with the new design for the tech school, because there was a pipe, all the roof runoff and all the surface water runoff, parking lots, et cetera, from the tech school were running down to this little wetland through a culvert into the bogs, ultimately to the ponds. So with the new tech school design, that's gonna all be eliminated and treated much farther away on site, so that'll be a decent elimination.
And Route 124 being looked at and redone
And
by
Route
the highway department, they're looking at the
124, yep.
culvert connecting. So
Yep.
they'll address anything along that road, which is upstream of that. So, yeah, that would help.
Improvements.
Yep.
I have a question now that
Sure.
you've shown this chart. So if I'm reading this right, it's saying the total load now is 352 kilograms a year coming in
Yeah,
of phosphorus, and that's a quarter of it is coming from Long Pond, the 26%.
yeah, 26%, yeah.
So the bottom load is half of that, it's
174, yeah.
172. So the Long Pond is just doubling because the total
Total load is
Yeah.
decreasing.
load is coming in. So the Long Pond is going from, the load is the same difference flowing in, the percentage is doubled.
Right,
Right, because you're removing.
Correct.
So that's saying, so there's still a significant part after the treatment of Long Pond, there's still, it's a fairly big source that goes into Hinckley.
Right, and you just think of the volume of water that's
Right.
coming through there compared
Because
to everything
again,
else.
on the previous meeting we had, the alum treated what was in there. It's not,
what was already in there.
Right, good point, yeah,
Right,
it's what
anything-
you have in there.
right, what's
not
coming
coming in
in
the future.
continues
Yeah,
without any reduction of other elements.
but not at the same rate that I think that it was going into prior,
Right.
because of other things we've
Well,
done with
hopefully we made
detergents
some
and phosphorus.
changes,
Yeah,
But, okay, so I think I
That's good.
understand this.
Okay.
deduction, yeah.
When do you think we should continue till?
Let's put it on for the 19th, and we'll see, hopefully we'll have something back from Heritage.
You'll get the RFP for sure, you'll get that
Yes.
within the days, so you have that.
I will
And
make
then
sure
if there are
I resend
questions,
things if I
you know,
didn't.
Yeah,
I'll
whatever
certainly
whatever you
prepare
sent to
for 'em.
Heritage,
Yeah.
send that to us.
Okay.
All right, thanks,
you.
Heinz.
We
I
have
move
to-
that we continue this hearing until December 19th.
Second.
Second by Mark. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thanks, Heinz.
Thank you, Heinz. Okay, next we have a notice of intent for the Weeks property at 116 South Street, storage of 800 lobster traps from November 1st to May 31st annually. I'm going to excuse myself because I've known the Weekses for a very long time. So maybe Stan, if you want to carry the hearing.
Sure, and are you abstaining
I'm abstaining.
as
yes.
well, so two.
I can-
So, Amy,
Should I leave?
It's
There's no
a-
reason for me to leave.
No, you
I
can
just
st-
will
you
keep
can
my
stay.
mouth shut.
Chair. You just can't say
You
anything.
just can't say anything, yeah.
Right.
So you're just gonna read it? Oh, did you already announce
I
the
already
hearing?
He did
Yep.
announce it, and then it
Oh,
was-
okay.
Pass the
So
gavel
I
to
was
him.
just gonna ask you for,
Sure. Well, I mean, I can introduce it, or Mr. Weeks can, essentially present your project to the commission.
Hi, yes, Ken Weeks, and we live over on 116 South Street, commercial lobster fisherman, lifelong. We're looking to, we filed for variance so that we can keep 800, up to 800 lobster traps in an area that I have shown on the little, on the plan there. And it is seasonal, would be from approximately, November 1st to May 31st. The area that I had the gear stored in before is no longer available to me, and it's just very hard to find a piece of property at this point that's, well, first and foremost affordable, but just to have a place to put the traps for 5 months has been a little tough. So I know that, I had the gear there last year with the permission of you folks, and Amy came out to see it, I believe it was in June, after the gear had been removed, and to the best of my knowledge, we didn't find that there was any real negative impact on anything there, if I'm correct.
We'll get in, at the time, no, but I'm curious if that area was left to itself, if you would start getting some different types of vegetation in there. But you can continue.
That's, basically the gist of it is, I am seeking permission to keep gear there for a short period of time. They said it's in and out of there as quickly as I can get it out, and the law allows us to fish. So, that's basically it.
okay, Amy, any comments?
Sure, thank you. I've had discussions for a long time with both Ken and Brenda, and while I can definitely empathize with and see the desire to want to keep them here, we have to look at it, at each project equally, and we have to have the same rules for everybody. I don't think we have ever allowed permit for disturbance actually in a wetland of this nature. It is temporary, it is seasonal. If it was, I don't know what would be there if it was left to itself for several kind of years without any disturbance in there. When I did go back and looked at it with you in the spring, there were the mosses and the sedges coming in. You have the tupelo trees, which are wetland indicators. It is very clearly a wetland. Whether it's, I think there's a variety of functions. There's a stream, believe it or not, that comes up there. There's high groundwater. There is issues that hopefully we're working with the highway about runoff from the road. But I think even without the runoff from the road, you'd still have a wetland here. So I think given the scope, 800 traps in a fairly large size of a wetland area, I don't think you're meeting the performance standards of the Wetlands Protection Act and our bylaw. In order to prevent wetland loss, which you have to avoid it wherever feasible. I understand you've been looking for other places to keep them. I think right now they're somewhere else, temporarily at least. Where alteration is unavoidable, require full mitigation. I don't know how you could mitigate for your proposed storage of disturbance. So, I don't think you've proved that the proposed work will not have a significant or cumulative impact. I am a little concerned too about when the traps come out, granted it's natural, but it's salt, it's stuff from the sea versus upland, and I don't know if there's any type of contaminants in there, but that's a small consideration. So unfortunately, I can't recommend approval, but I'm more than happy to continue to look at options with you.
Mark, any comment?
As much as I don't like the idea of being be in a situation to tell somebody what they can or can't do with their land. I can't see how it can comply. And I say that sadly.
I appreciate that. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but I mean, I do have a neighbor just to the south of me that has, for years, has cut down trees. There's wildlife there that are adding to the nitrogen in the soil. This has been going on for quite a few years. I feel like I'm being, not punished, but I mean, why is it good for one? I mean, I believe, and I'm almost certain that I have much less negative impact on my piece of land than my neighbor next door to me has. I haven't cut any trees down. I haven't rerouted the brook down there to make a goldfish pond. I don't have chickens putting nitrogen into the water table or into the soil, yet he can go on and do that. There's buildings there, there's vehicles there. I mean, my neighbors are here, I run a very clean operation. I mean, and I don't think there's anything on those traps that would cause negative impact.
I can certainly look into those other things.
I just don't think it's fair. I mean,
Well, if there's something that's going on and that we should look into, I will definitely look into that.
I know the gentleman that was here that did the wetland delineation for me.
Yep.
He saw the activity that had taken place over there, and that added to the problem. With no trees in the area, there's nothing to absorb the water, so that
Yep.
falls more on me.
Mhm.
The basin that's supposed to be going in through the town at the end of South Street in the corner of Gilbert, I mean, I have some very good pictures of the water runoff that's there that builds up, and that comes in onto my property also. I know today when you took a ride down there, I'm sure that, you know, there's been some conditions there exasperated by rain,
Yes.
you know, so. You know, we have spent a lot of money on preparing this. It's just a tough situation. I mean, you know, the fishermen in Chatham just found out they've got no place to keep their gear now at the airport. So, not sure what we're gonna do, but that's where we stand. I mean, I don't know if there are any other avenues that I can take with you folks, or, you know, some other way of doing this, but, you know, it would be nice to be able to keep the gear there. I mean, even if I was able to get it beyond the area that's flagged, I mean, can I keep it there?
That's something we certainly talk about, is keeping it potentially in the buffer zone as opposed to actually in the wetland itself. And if there's adequate room on other parts of your property where it could fit. So that's something that's open for discussion.
And would that be at a later time, or can we discuss that now, or we can do it now? Yeah, just because I am in the middle of taking my gear in at this point. And it's not a small undertaking. It's, you know, I fish out of Sandwich. I have for most of my life. So getting gear back and forth is not a small task.
Any other comments, Mark?
I'm sorry, I'm all set.
Carolyn?
One of the ways we can overcome grant a variance is by showing hardship, but you haven't shown it. You've just kind of alluded to it.
How would I mean, as far as showing it, you know, I mean, I've been looking for a couple of years to find a place to put traps that would be suitable, you know, and I don't know how else to display hardship other than, you know, cost. I mean, I don't have $80,000, $90,000, $100,000 to go out and buy a small lot to put my traps on.
Well, again, as you overheard the previous hearing, that we can't just grant something or not approve based on just what someone says. We need documentation in front of us. And as I was sitting here, I'm sure you've looked into it, but it does seem to me that we have new storage area at the Saquatucket Harbor, and if there could be some cooperation between the lobstermen and the town, because the storage, the parking lot at Saquatucket is not as used in the winter as it is in the summer, that your interests.
We do winter boat storage, but it's certainly something to chat with John Rendon about.
Who would I see about that?
The harbor master.
Okay.
John.
All right.
To see if, or I mean, I know that Allen Harbor recently purchased the property right next to the mill store on 28, and they're doing boat storage there. But maybe some areas that are doing boat storage might be a venue to look at for trap storage.
Okay.
Just an idea.
Yeah.
Anything else, Carol?
No, so if you could produce some proof of hardship, and I would like to see that.
Any recommendations on how, what you would be looking for as far as that goes? I mean, it's,
Well,
show you my kids' college tuition bills, and then I can...
no, that doesn't count. That doesn't count. That doesn't count, but where you went and how much it would have cost to use it on this particular property or that
All right.
particular property, some kind of documentation that it is a hardship.
All right. All right. I'll
Because
see.
I could tell you, it's a hardship for me to sit here at night on these meetings, but,
All right. Okay, well, I'll do that. I mean, I can certainly dig up, the prices of property and what it is, and,
Well, you'd have to come up with other alternatives than purchasing property.
okay,
Right.
all
I
right.
mean, as we said, we just gave 2 examples of places that store boats or.
Boats, but I mean, yeah, well, I'll have to find out if they would take traps too, so I can go down and see the harbor master.
Also, I would potentially ask him on Larry, this is more of a selectman matter, but the property on Bank Street, the old fire station, where we've typically been doing harbor operations.
Right, I know what you mean.
I don't know what the status of that property is, but,
It's still in,
but it's a lot of ours.
it's still in limbo. We haven't taken action on that.
Okay.
The other is Harwichport Boatyard has purchased property a couple years ago as boat storage. You might want to speak to them. They're in North Harwich, and so it's would be convenient.
I know exactly where they are, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's, I do business with them.
Yeah, that's what I would do, see it.
All right.
Jim?
Thank you.
Yeah. The Saquatucket idea sounds good. I haven't heard that come up at the meetings, but I would certainly be supportive of allowing fishermen to store gear there. I think that's very appropriate, so hopefully that could be a solution, and that could maybe be affordable as well if they have to charge at all. As far as putting them in the wetland, I don't see myself voting to approve that, though. It's just-
And no consideration for, like what we said, above that line there?
It's possible, once you get outside the 50, it'd be pretty easy to do. Within the 50-foot buffer, I'd have to look at that. It's still kind of tough. We don't allow, theoretically, we allow very few, if any, activities in the buffer is the language, and to be consistent,
Righty.
it'd be kind of hard to approve.
So could you fit them between the 50 and the 100-foot buffer on the,
It's in the front
Is it-
yard,
is the side yard? Well,
side yard.
Yeah, I don't... Yeah, I don't think, well, that's the neighbor I'm talking about that's had violated the wetlands for years, and I don't think that would be a good fit next door there at all. Plus driving it at, my septic system is right here,
You don't want that.
so I wouldn't be able to get over there, to take the traps in or out.
you mean with machinery?
No, just with my truck.
The weight over a septic system,
yeah.
yeah.
Good point.
I was just thinking, this was the proposed area. My thought was, where's the line? It's right,
You've got your driveway there
50
too.
line.
yeah, and there's an embankment there. I thought maybe
Yeah,
just
your
around,
50
around
is-
this area here,
Your 50 is,
Okay.
how long have you owned this house?
18 years,
We bought it in 2000,
yes, and we built it,
so you're not grandfathered for anything.
not that I know of. No, it's just, I mean, you know, obviously it has been very convenient to work, you know, to have the gear right there and get it in and out, and it's, you know, you're not worried about it. I mean, traps are pretty expensive these days, so.
Is that lawn right there in the 50?
Here's the 50 line.
Right.
Yeah, right up to that line, there's a lawn there.
Yeah, but it's a slope.
Yeah, there's a slope there. That's a thought. So, I mean, it wouldn't be, I mean, yeah, it does slope down there. I mean, there's a small flat area there that possibly, but it's all lawn. All right, well, I'll do what I can to see if I can, you know, make something up for a hardship and, you know, look around and see what's there and present that, I guess, at a later date. We'll stay in touch with Amy, I guess, on that. And do that.
Anything else? Ken?
No, that's all.
I just had a couple of comments, going back to the original intent. You know, we talked about temporary and seasonal, but we're also talking 6 months of the year from what was indicated. So that's a pretty significant time of the year, and I would be concerned with the impact on the wetlands during that. I mean, I saw the area today. I mean, basically everything's within that wet area. So I'd be very concerned against that. But some of the other things I mentioned, again, I was thinking about Sacotucket because of what was mentioned at the selectmen's meeting Monday. I think there's a proposal to go with boats, because of the new docks and everything, and the ability to keep boats in the water, that they may be storing fewer boats. I don't know, I have no idea.
Right.
Tom, again, would be the harbor master there, but there might be opened up capacity on land because boats may be staying in the water over the winter. I had thought about Bank Street as well, when you had mentioned it. And I'm not familiar, but in driving around, but I do see parts like there's one that I notice, and I have no idea who they are or whatever, like over on Morton Road on the way in Chatham, off to the left, there's a open field there stored with lobster traps in there, and I have no idea who is in there or whether they have capacity or would be willing to, but that's another area I thought of. Just from driving, and I'm not a fisherman by any means, I mean, but just saying, you know, that's a spot I had seen around town.
The old building there where their harbor master had worked out of there on Bank Street, would the harbor master be the one to speak to about that?
Initially, and then selectmen.
Okay,
Initially.
all right,
I can help you with that, Bo.
all right.
Get that ball rolling if you want to pursue that.
That would definitely be an immediate possibility, because nothing's gonna happen to
Right.
that for.
Right, for at least this year.
At least this year.
At least this year. You know, the town, last spring meeting, they voted to sell that, but it's very restricting. So that's before, you know, basic environmental uses, because it borders the wetlands, so there would be a parking lot for that. So I would definitely contact, Amy can lead you on that.
Yeah, I can help you.
And along with that, I think the Sacotucket is really more for next year rather than this year, the winter storage.
Sorry.
I don't wanna get in trouble.
No, I know, well, I started it
Not
there.
speaking on, Sacotucket's a little bit more problematic because we've agreed to provide some leasing for big sailboats to get out. Yeah, and, but that's not going to happen until next year because of the timing issue. The other problem is that the town only has control over about half of that lot because the Army Corps of Engineers dredged the part of it, so we only have the western side of that lot. We don't have control, so it looks much bigger than it is, and you know, we can't utilize, about half of it, the town has no say on how we utilize it. So that's not a real, I won't rank that as high as some other options.
Okay.
What I was thinking of was, but what you're referring to is the part that the town controls is where the boats would be stored, right? And all I was suggesting is there might be freed up space if other and again, it's only a possibility, we don't know. But I guess my question at this point, should we just continue this at this point?
I would. I think what you're hearing from the commission is there's not a real positive feeling about keeping them exactly as you want to keep them here. And as shown in this plan. But if you want to.
Even if with a hardship, I mean, is that gonna have any bearing or not?
You still have to prove that you're not having a negative impact, and that's kind of a hard thing to do.
What about,
Because I think right now we're saying maybe you have to look at some other options.
Yeah.
What-
Nobody wants to deny anybody of anything.
no, I know that, I know, but what is the negative impact?
I think, I mean, and I've written it out for the commissioners, but, let's see. Basically, like under our regulations, there is no proposal to avoid alteration to the wetlands, and there's no mitigation being offered. You haven't met the requirements, and I can give you the performance standards, but you haven't met the requirements for working in the wetland, the no disturb zone of the buffer. And that's just under the regulations, not including the Wetlands Protection Act with the state bylaw. I just don't think you've met the general performance standards of basically no adverse impact. You haven't proven that there's no adverse impact, and that's hard to do without years and many studies and things like that to do. Whenever you do an activity in a wetland, and even if it's over the winter season, you could have impact to the roots, you could have impact to, you could stunt the growth of future things, especially if you're not getting rid of the traps till May 31st, which is like the height of the spring growing season, things like that. So it would be very hard to prove that there is no adverse impact.
Would there be a difference if the season itself, the amount of time that I'm requesting, was shortened?
That would have to be something for the
It'd still
commission to
be a
consider.
thing, I think, of how do you prove that? I mean,
And
again,
also-
it's a significant,
Just not something we've really permitted, something of this magnitude like this, for actual new permitted activity in a wetland, like in this type of a wetland.
and again, I think with all things, I mean, this is completely in a wetland area. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
area that we're talking about, it's not outside the 50 or anything. I mean, it's really in the wetland. We really restrict anything going on in the wetlands area.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming, I mean, your driveway, that's your access point, because it would still need a variance from being the 50-foot buffer, but if it was in a driveway, I don't know if the commission would feel differently about that.
That was gonna be my next question. If the gear was stored there in that driveway area, and not beyond, I mean, it's pretty clear as to where that driveway went, if you folks went down there, I mean.
The driveway to the shed?
Yeah,
Which, that's not even on this drawing, so I don't know where that driveway came from. Was that permitted?
it was just a flat part of the land that went down there, and I just covered it with shells, I mean, it's,
So that's technically shouldn't even be there, I guess, if it hadn't been presented to the board.
I really didn't, I didn't change anything that was,
There was no fill or anything brought in.
I mean, just the shells covered, and that flat was a flat area to,
That, I mean, it would be in the buffer zone, that would be the commission, we can talk about that if you, I think one of the things you need to do is explore these other options first, because
Right.
we have to look at the least impactful.
But even that driveway with the shed, I think that's within the 50 at this
Right.
point.
Oh, it's definitely.
Yeah.
And
It's
I will
within
say, I mean,
25.
back a couple years ago, we used an old plan that Mr. Weeks had, and that shed has been permitted by our department, because at that time, the wetlands delineation was really the ditch for the cranberry bog old bog back there, or just the ditch that's in the back there. So that shed, at the time, was proposed to be outside the 50, but with the new delineation, it puts it within it, so.
Is there an existing order of conditions for the property from construction and?
Yes. And that was the plan that was used for the shed when I did it administratively.
All right.
So
Well-
I guess I think it's in best, Mr. Weeks' benefit is to continue at this point.
Yeah, I think,
Rather than us vote on
right,
All right.
this.
tonight,
So do I have a motion?
would be the
Any comments
19th.
from the audience?
Oh, I'm sorry, are there any comments from the audience? You have a
So the
motion?
19th would be the next meeting.
I'll
In the
make a
meantime, I'll
motion
talk
to
you.
continue this hearing till the next
Oh,
meeting.
Is that?
December
good-
19th.
Is that good for you?
The 19th? Is that what you said? To when?
Yes, 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
You have a
And-
second?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Abstention.
Actually, is everybody
I'm abstaining.
Two
who
abstentions.
are the 4 of you gonna be here on the 19th? As far as you know?
I will.
Okay.
As far as I know now.
Need a quorum. Okay. In the meantime, I'll talk to you either tomorrow or Friday, and I'll put you in contact with the harbor master and the selectmen to see if
Alright.
there's something that we can help you with,
All right, that'd be great.
okay?
Thank you all.
Thank you, have a good night.
No, turn it back over to you.
Thank you.
Scott, Stan?
Yeah, nice job, Stan.
You have to announce King, or, oh no, actually, we're doing, never
Yep.
mind, I'm jumping ahead.
Next, we have a notice of intent for 119 Julian Road, proposed tear down of the house and rebuild.
Thank you for coming.
Great, thanks, Amy. I don't like it when they hand us out stuff at the last minute. Can't they get this stuff to us before?
No, she said keep going.
Oh, keep going.
Yes.
Okay. David Clark, Clark Engineering, and Teresa Sprague from Blue Flax Design, on behalf of the applicants, looking for a notice of intent to demolish their house and build a new house. The resource areas involved are, where the house is primarily land subject to coastal storm flowage, in the velocity zone, elevation 13. The other resource areas immediately adjacent to the project site there's a coastal dune in front of us and obviously a coastal beach and under the ocean to the south, and then to the east of us is a salt marsh. The coastal dune that's in front of us, the house is pretty much at the end of a elevated landform. We have coastal banks to the west of us, and we're right at the transition point where it becomes a barrier beach to the east of us. So the proposal is to demolish the existing dwelling. The dwelling is in the floodplain. The new house would be elevated on piers, so that it would be above the floodplain. Amy had asked me last week to provide a little more detail of what this house is gonna look like, so I provided the architect's rendering of two of the facades to show you what it's gonna look like. Everything below the deck is breakaway panels. This particular architect likes to use hinged panels, so they're hinged at the top, pinned at the top, so wave or dune action can easily swing them so they don't become waterborne debris. The second page of what I just handed out is a rough schematic of what the foundation is going to look like. You see the little black boxes are the piles, and the gray, the thick lines that kind of connect them are what's called grade beams. And on top of that, there would be either galvanized steel piers that would support the house or cast-in-place concrete piers. They haven't made up their mind which way to go. And the last two pages show kind of what the typical construction process is for that. The first picture is almost exactly the type of equipment that would be used to put in the helical piles. So they're galvanized steel screws, basically, that are screwed into the ground till there's a certain amount of pressure resistance on the gauge, and that gives them the bearing capacity of that particular pile. Those piles would then be cut a certain distance from finished grade, and the second picture shows there's a cap that gets placed on it, and it shows a trench where the rebar would be for what's called a grade beam that interconnects all those helical piles. And then the next page shows the rebar that would come up for if we were doing concrete piers. And the last picture shows what the finished concrete pier would typically look like. I estimate somewhere between 36 and 42 screws are going to be required for the support system for the house, and that includes the deck.
Sorry,
The
Dave,
house-
what were those numbers? I apologize.
It's somewhere between 36 and 42,
Okay,
somewhere
thank you.
around there. It hasn't been designed yet, but we did a very similar project in Chatham, in the velocity zone. And it was a bigger house that actually used less because it was a square house. This one got some jogs in it, so you got to add a few more at the changes in direction. Overall, the project is, with the exception of the driveway, is reducing the footprint of activity within the floodplain. They have an outdoor patio, outdoor deck right now. All that is coming up with the house, and it's becoming deck. So there's actually a little bit of a reduction in the structure. The site coverage numbers do show an increase within the floodplain, and that is all due to the driveway. Because the house is coming up so high, there's a lot of unusable space below the house, and they thought that'd be a good place to put two cars. So you look at the first page of what I handed out, it shows a rendering of where two garage doors could go, and you could place two cars underneath. As far as the performance standards, pretty much all the work is within land subject to coastal storm flowage. We are in the no disturb zone to the dune and the salt marsh, but we're not proposing any alterations to the dune and no alterations to the salt marsh. We feel that once the project is completed, it's actually a benefit to the dune because we're taking away an obstacle or a vertical block to any movement of sand either along the beach or from the beach to allow the dune to migrate inland if it chooses to, or if the conditions warrant it. And that's the advantage of putting it up on piers, so there will no longer be an obstruction to the movement of sand in this area. There's an existing Title V system. It passed the inspection when the applicants bought the property 2 years ago. There's no alterations required to that. We'll simply disconnect the existing house from it, put down some steel plate over the system so it doesn't get disturbed during the construction process, and then reconnect when the construction's complete. And we understand the area we're in is very sensitive, and the applicants brought Teresa on board to do a land management restoration plan for this project. But if you have any questions on the engineered plan, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, let Teresa talk about her plan.
Okay. Want to just hear the whole proposal?
I wonder if we should hear your comments, Amy, on the proposed structure before we get into the vegetation plan.
Okay, that's fine. Quick question, can you please run through the numbers of existing hardscape versus proposed?
So,
You touched on it in your narrative, I just wanna.
I did, just looking at, basically, on the existing site coverage, somewhere about in the middle, where the existing steppers, shower, and slab to the top, including the building coverage, there is, I think, 3,400 square feet of coverage. Let's see, 34,
You have
3,500. Oh, and then, let me take a look at the narrative, I probably got it all right there.
You have existing dwelling, garage, and other alterations, have a total coverage of 7,260. Does that include the pervious driveway, though?
That includes the driveway, yeah.
I'm just curious about proposed.
And the proposed is 7759, and as I stated earlier, that all the increase is due to the extension of the driveway to provide access to 2 parking spaces
Gotcha.
under the dwelling.
That's what I thought, so, thank you.
But as far as the structure itself and all the hardscape that goes with it, patios, walkways, outdoor shower and whatnot, there's a slight reduction over what's there now.
Reduction in hardscape.
Yeah.
Okay, so the addition is really just pervious driveway.
Yeah.
And actually, if you've been to the site today, where the driveway proposed to go up, there's, some of that is stairs, kind of existing, just shell on the ground. It's already, I would consider disturbed. And that kind of leads into some of the mitigation, which we'll get into. So my other question, I know that these are just kind of rough initial architectural renderings. One of the benefits of the project is, even though technically you have a very small coastal bank immediately behind the toe of the coastal dune, before you hit the existing house, there's not much of a, not huge difference there. And it would be nice to allow, as you said, freer sand migration, because there's not a whole lot of elevation difference. There's a little bit of vegetation and difference between the dune and the bank there. But I would be interested, though, I mean, I see that you have these kind of breakaway walls, which are like lattice type. If maybe, especially in the deck area, the area closest to the dune, if that could be maybe a little bit more open, as opposed to maybe not close in the entire thing somehow. That's just a suggestion. It would allow for some increased sand migration. And we'll talk about, I mentioned it to you, I think, the boardwalk planks after we talk about this project. But tonight, but after this, I think. So those are my 2 main questions, is somehow allowing for a little bit more freer sand movement where the edge of dune, top of bank is, and then you answered my question about the coverage, so thank you.
Thank you, Amy. All right, let's go around and ask questions on the proposed structure. Do you want to start?
Yeah, so I have some questions. And I see you're showing the elevation drawings are from the northeast and northwest. And my recollection of that site is the way the drive comes in from, I guess it's the end of Julian that comes right to the house, that's at actually substantially lower elevation than the top of the dune on the south side of the house. And looking at these elevation drawings, you're showing that the pilings are elevating the house well above the elevation where the drive comes in. I think that's how I understand it. But how far above the top of the dune are they? And what happens with the storm flow, which would be coming from the south, presumably, the weather, that's where it would be coming from. And is it going to be hitting the hard structure of the house and not going under the house because it's going over the dune and into the house?
That's a good question. Building code requires that the lowest structural member, which would be the lowest carrying timber of the house, which sits on top of the pile, the bottom of that timber has to be 2 feet above the flood elevation. So
2
the
feet.
bottom of that timber in this particular case is elevation 15. So,
Because the flood is elevation
and the flood
13.
is 13.
So that, the top of the dune there is like 15 feet or 13 feet?
Top of the dune is elevation, probably elevation 7. We come up over the dune and then back down. There's a little bit of a valley in the backside of the dune before you hit the coastal bank.
About 8,
So the top of the bank is about elevation 10.
right.
Crest of the dune in front of it is
Right.
probably 7, somewhere around there. So there's substantial amount of freeboard.
Yep.
I see, okay. So, and you're showing 30-foot height of the house from, not from the base elevation though?
From the floodplain. That's what the new Harwich bylaw, I think it's a couple of years old now, is 30 feet from the base flood elevation.
In a in a floodplain, but
I see.
especially in a velocity zone, you measure from the flood elevation, then up.
Okay, so then I also have questions about the breakaway panels. It's like, I'm having a hard time imagining hinges that would hold when you've got, 80 or 90 knot winds or whatever blowing water off of Nantucket Sound. I'm trying to picture what it is that you would build there that wouldn't just make those things go flying off their hinges.
In a 100-year storm, they're probably not gonna stay there. So the
Supposed to
idea
break
of
away.
hinging them is for a less storm event.
Yeah.
In that they don't wanna be continuously picking up the pieces of the lattice work. Because it is, by
Yeah,
code,
sure.
has to be,
Right.
has to give during a storm. So it doesn't form a barrier that, for wind and water, that creates a pressure on the house.
Yeah, I
So
get
it
that.
needs to go during a storm event. So the idea with the hinges in a lesser storm event, it'll be able to hinge and it won't create that pressure on the house. It'll give a little, but certainly in a major storm event,
Don't they then become projectiles? They're gonna mess up the couple really nice new houses behind there?
they'll probably get jammed up within themselves underneath the structure.
That's all. Those are my questions about the structure.
I have no questions.
Okay, Carol?
No, I have no questions.
I'm just trying to picture this myself. I'm a little bit confused. We have two pictures showing northeast elevation.
One's northwest.
If I'm,
Northwest.
oh,
Northwest.
northwest, okay. So is this house being like turned from where it is now?
Well,
Because I'm trying to picture the garages. Is this the back of the house?
the garage is the northeast side, which basically faces the cranberry bog. I mean, the
The
salt
marsh.
marsh. And the northwest side is what, I guess,
Okay, so the driveway is gonna come in along the marsh and go into the garages? That's what I was trying to picture
the
from.
driveway is gonna pretty much stay where it is up till you get to the house, and then it'll go up the slope.
Where the
Yeah.
lift, okay, so that is going up or being dug out? to go
It's
underneath the
going
house?
up. I think the elevation of that driveway down below is, yep, about elevation 5 to 6.
Excuse me.
So we got a 3 to 4 foot run.
Up, so it's going uphill?
Yes.
And so your bottom pillars in the breakaway are up here on top?
The bottom of the breakaway panels will be about
It's up in
elevation
here.
8 at the driveway, and probably 10 out by the top of bank.
And again, okay, so I understand that now. And I guess I'm questioning again the breakaway panel type thing. Again, you're saying they're not solid, they're open for the dune migration.
Yeah.
But that can only migrate so far if you've got garage underneath
Right.
and.
Well, the garage isn't totally enclosed either. It has to be enclosed with those same breakaway panels. So all 4 sides of the structure is required by code to have breakaway panels.
Right.
So they're all
Oh, so it's just like a dirt floor or something for the garage, or is it?
Yeah, probably a gravel
Gravel.
floor
Or
or something.
gravel or
Yeah.
whatever, but not cement, okay.
No, not cement, no.
Now,
Yeah, it
I'm-
can
I'm,
be.
I'm picturing it now better.
You don't get many of these in Harwich, so,
No, speaking to the,
Well, I'm picturing a house that I know of in Rhode Island that they built where it's up on stilts and everything, but it's a cement floor and everything, so I was just trying to picture this
Yeah.
different than what I was
gotcha.
seeing that. Okay, so, now I understand the picture,
So
and,
this, you're sure this is not gonna have a cement floor?
pardon me?
You're sure this is not gonna have a cement floor? Because in New Jersey, I think many,
you
many,
can
many
condition it not to.
of the houses do have a cement floor underneath them.
I would say, I mean, condition it not to.
yeah, I would assume with the breakaway and the wash, yeah, I wouldn't think you'd want one in there, some kind of gravel, like you say, or something. And then I guess my only other concern with what we've talked about is that, walkway over the marsh. I
Well,
don't
that's
know.
not on this property. It's entirely within Julian Road.
Is it?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry if I looked at the line wrong.
and,
Okay, we'll deal with that separately then.
Okay.
and I'm not
I
sure
I
who,
misread the
No,
property line.
we were considering that part of this project anyways, but I am concerned about that being there.
Yeah.
From
Where is the property line
whoever
on
put
this?
it there.
Where is the
yeah,
property line?
from what I
It's
understand, there are
right-
folks up the road that think they have
Yeah.
rights to the beach, and,
I think there is an easement, but
there's a
it's brand new walkway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The land court plan that created Julian Road shows Julian Road not going all the way to the water, so
So if
it's
it's not
not.
under property, then
Like
I'll
boards on the
retract
ground,
that
basically.
question at this
Oh,
point.
This
they
is-
built something,
Okay, that's all I have. at this
oh,
point.
I should go over there and look then.
No comments.
No comment? Okay. I guess I have a bunch. So the footprint of the proposed building, I think, is staked out on the ocean side to be the same face as the existing building.
Yes,
And so
Yeah.
the deck that's there now is what's going to be in the place of the deck that's there now.
so the deck's going up with the house.
Yep.
So, the architect is showing the breakaway panels enclosing the deck, the underside of the deck.
Okay. So I guess, I look at this and I just see, here's an opportunity to pull things back off the dune.
So here's the
And-
existing.
You know, you are allowed to rebuild in the footprint that exists. That can be done. But there's proposals to do a little bit more. And it seems to me like on page 6 of your plan, it says the project involves replacement of existing dwelling with new dwelling. There's 419 square feet larger than the existing dwelling.
Yep.
So that's an expansion.
But
that,
overall, there's a reduction.
Right, but we don't have to necessarily approve that expansion. You are entitled to replace the footprint that you have. And so that is an expansion of building where you had patio. So that's a concern to me. And so I'd also like to, I know Amy asked questions about site coverage, but on the plan, your titles of your existing site coverage do not match the proposed. So it's hard for me to determine exactly what is going to change here. Do you know what I'm talking about? You've got building coverage existing, you've got proposed dwelling. The titles are not
Oh.
consistent.
Yeah, we say dwelling on the second one, and actually building, yeah.
Right, so there is an expansion of building, which I have concern about. I don't view necessarily that you can trade existing structure for new structures in terms of dwelling. That's not necessarily something that we
Right.
have to approve.
Yeah, deck to patio is one thing, I guess you could consider.
Right,
Building
so-
to deck another, even though the patio is pretty hard.
Right, so I would like to see consideration for pulling this back a little bit. Right now, you've got building activity, human activity, right on that top of that dune. And so is it compatible at all with the proponent, with the plans, to bring this back a little bit? To me, it's a tremendous opportunity to do the right thing in that regard for this property. That building is just sitting right there on the edge.
We have no room to move it back.
With setbacks,
Well, we have a septic system that we can't touch, really, in that, there's no other place to put a septic system, and I think the previous owner went through great pains to get one on this property. So we are right to the setback to the septic system. In regards to the expansion, we looked at it that there was no adverse impact to the resource area, in that it's above the floodplain. So we're taking patio and deck out of the floodplain and basically changing it over to structure that's above the floodplain. So we feel it has no impact on the resource area.
Right. The deck's gonna go away, and you'll have this situation where the dune really can't go, it's not gonna expand under the building, right?
Well, we're required to, under the building code, to allow it to go where it wants. In that, under the
You might
building
get some
code,
sand in
that because we're next to a dune, we can't impede the landward migration of the dune.
Why wouldn't the panels do just that?
It'll trap the sand, but eventually the sand, as I've seen in other situations, the sand works its way in through the panels and gets into the underside of the building.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm just concerned with the plan. I see it as an opportunity to take a footprint that really is imposing on the environment and to make it a little bit better, to change it, to reduce it. In this case, it's maximizing it and pushing it a little bit further. So I think I'm disappointed by that approach. I think I'm gonna have to look at this really carefully and look at the performance standards and try to get a better sense of whether we have any impacts here or things that can be avoided.
That's the oil tank. That's being removed.
We don't have to approve a structure that's different from the footprint. It's a pre-existing structure.
Right.
There's no obligation that we have to approve something different. That's grandfathered, that's in the regulations. So, to me, it was when I heard this was coming up, I thought there'd be a chance to, get off that dune a little bit more and to improve it, but there's not a lot happening there in that regard. So, I guess I'd like to request that you clean up your site coverage a little bit, so it's very clear as to what's gonna happen. And I'd like to ask you to consider with the property owners if there's any potential to make those improvements and scale back that frontage. I mean, human activity is gonna stay the same right on that edge. So, there's not a lot of gains here, and with this reconstruction, I would see an opportunity to really make some gains here.
Well, we look at it as a tremendous gain in that we're removing a structure from the floodplain and removing the potential of
I agree with
water.
you, I agree with the flood protection. I think you're absolutely
And by
right.
elevating it, we are, although it doesn't appear that way to you, we feel that it does allow the dune to migrate landward.
Yeah, those panels, if they stay put, you're not gonna have plants go into there. You're gonna have sand go in there, but I don't see any plant structure developing underneath the building. So I think that for flood control, absolutely, there's some real progress here, and I think that's fantastic. In terms of human activities and impacts right on that edge of that dune, I'd like to see some better progress here. That's maybe just my personal preference, so it's just something I'm putting out there for people to consider.
Can I just ask for a clarification?
Sure.
I thought you said, maybe kind of calling out the square footages of the building and then the decks, patios, like kind of separating those a little bit would be a little helpful, because didn't you say that there was a net reduction in hardscape
If you take
here, so,
the dwelling, the existing dwelling, the existing deck, and the existing patio, those
I'm a little
main.
confused as to where the patio is.
It's-
I've just passed a picture.
yeah,
and-
we walked on it.
We
tonight.
walked on it.
Yeah.
This is, remember we came up
That's,
with
that, oh, this patio, I
Yeah.
got it. Okay, you're
Mhm.
not, are you counting the stepping stone area by the outside shower as part of your hardscape?
The steppers, right?
This area.
Yeah,
That's being counted in your number?
everything that's,
This area.
yeah,
Yeah. That's considered hardscape?
yes.
So more building. I don't think that this is really what our regulations want to see
Well, that's not
happen.
gonna change, that step area.
No, we're actually removing all the gravel and the stepping stones.
Yeah, that area's
planting
not
it with
changing.
beach grass and just providing a roll-up boardwalk just for access around the side
Yeah.
of the house
Well, in terms of
as part of
house,
the
or
mitigation plan.
it's not.
But like I said,
I'm just trying
existing
to,
house, existing deck, existing patio.
Yeah.
Total those three up versus proposed house and proposed deck.
uh-huh,
There's a reduction.
On the shuffleboard. That's
Yeah, but
all
your
going
narrative
away.
doesn't say that. It says the existing dwelling, new dwelling is 419 square feet larger than the existing dwelling. That's a direct contradiction to what you just said.
No, I said the total of the dwelling,
Oh,
the deck, and the patio
okay,
the coverage.
versus the new dwelling and deck.
okay, so it's mixing and matching structures.
Right.
Yes.
And we're allowed to
Absolutely.
approve the reconstruction of the existing footprint.
Mm-hmm.
And so I need to better understand
Okay,
potential resource impacts to this shuffling of structures. And right now, I'm not favoring any expansion of the existing footprint of the building without some type of benefits to that front dune.
Okay.
That's my personal feeling for this property.
Okay.
The other thing I'm a little bit confused, in the narrative, you say is proposed, the overall coverage of buildings, decks, and patios will be reduced by 406 square feet.
Yeah.
But then I'm just looking at the drawing, and if you're looking at site coverage, overall, it's saying it's going up 499.
yeah, and I said that, I prefaced that in the beginning of my comments, is in that all the increase is the extension of the driveway to provide 2 parking spaces under the building.
Right.
So, and that would all be pervious, but still, it's increase in site coverage.
Right.
Yeah, it's very difficult to figure that out from the site coverage, given the different labels. It's the case you just described. It'd be hard to figure that out.
Okay.
So if you could try to standardize that terminology,
Sure.
that would be helpful.
But even there, you're saying it's from the driveway, but and again, I'm maybe getting confused here. The existing driveway is 3,200
Yeah.
plus, the new driveway is 2,900 plus.
No, that's the existing, the portion of the existing driveway to remain is 2,900,
Right.
and then the new driveway extension is a 1,226 square feet.
Oh,
So-
okay, I see it now, yeah.
Yeah, I should probably drop that down next to so you can compare it to the,
Gotcha, I missed that, okay, thank you.
Is it, just to clarify, would it be easier for the commission if they did like a side-by-side comparison, like sketch, where you have existing versus proposed versus an overlap, which is, because of the activity, it's a bit much? Or are you okay with it, showing it as it is?
I think it's hard to tell the way it's shown.
Thinking maybe you just do it 2 side-by-side,
oh, sure.
the same.
I can do a second sheet, and I'll blow this up so it takes up half
Perfect.
the sheet, and then you'd
That'll be good.
have,
I think it'll look clearer.
yeah.
And you might be able to take some of the stuff out, you might even be able to put the square footages kind of right on there for each piece.
Any more comments on the structure itself? Okay, do you want to move on to the vegetation plan?
Sure. I'm just gonna pass around the rest of these photos, and then I'll walk you through, from the vegetation management perspective. the existing conditions from vegetation perspective, the coastal dune itself, and you'll see a picture passing around that shows the deck, existing deck right on the dune. So I do think there is a benefit in the fact that the house is being elevated, that all of the foot traffic is going to be above the dune, actually, rather than on top of the dune as it currently exists. Because the dune itself is in good ecological condition. There's an existing naturalized native plant community, including beach grass, some Virginia rose. There is a significant amount of rugosa rose, but it doesn't seem to be out-competing any of the other vegetation, native vegetation. It's not inhibiting the growth of other native vegetation in the dune area. Other species, native species on the site include pitch pine, beach plum, bayberry, and some eastern red cedar. There is an area with a shuffleboard court, which I don't believe is included in the calculations. It's some Japanese maples. There are some healthy eastern red cedars that we planted on the abutting property as part of mitigation for that reconstruction of that house. That's directly abutting the shuffleboard court area that will be removed. The vegetation around the house, the deck, the garage, between the driveway and the salt marsh is currently a mix of native and mainly invasive vegetation. You can see the invasive vegetation in the photos in the land management plan and the photos I'm passing around. Porcelain berry, bittersweet, autumn olive, vine honeysuckle, shrub honeysuckle, phragmites, and some black locust are the invasive species found on site. Again, the property contains a large amount of semi-pervious surface in the form of gravel, shell substrate, and then there's also a well-established sand footpath leading through the dune to the beach area. So the proposed plan, the plan proposes to meet three main goals: to enhance the ecological integrity of the resource areas in buffer zone. We're proposing to do that by restoring approximately 2,600 square feet of area by removing invasive vegetation, replanting native and naturalized vegetation, and providing a diversity of plant species on the site. To obviously protect the integrity of the coastal dune, which would be to construct the dwelling above the dune so that it meets current flood code, and as David pointed out, allow sand to move landward and laterally throughout the area. In a situation like this, and we've done many house elevations, lifts in coastal dune areas throughout Wellfleet, Eastham, et cetera, the goal here is not to allow sand accretion or vegetation to grow under the house. It's just to allow the sand to move in and around the house. We're not encouraging sand to necessarily accrete underneath the structure, to move it out, and that vegetation not necessarily to grow under the structure, but to be allowed to grow around it and allow the sand to move around the structure. And increase the native vegetation around the house by removing the shuffleboard and semi-pervious gravel paths and stepping stones and returning them back to naturalized area. And then the third goal, of course, is to improve the existing wildlife habitat and function within the resource areas. So we believe that the project overall does provide a significant improvement to the protection of the resource area through elevating the house, removing invasive plant species, as restoring native plant species, allowing sand to move landward and laterally, and removing the structure from the velocity zone where it could potentially cause damage in the condition that it's in. We have noted that the half of the dune is categorized as estimated priority habitat. However, we're not proposing any management in the coastal dune itself, just within the buffer to the salt marsh and within the buffer to the coastal dune, sorry. With that, I'm happy to answer any specific questions. We have on page 8 our restoration process. We're looking at selective treatment, hand removal. There is one eastern red cedar noted on the plan, and I passed around some pictures. It's really degraded by vine material right directly to the southwest of the house. We are proposing to remove that and replace it with beach plums. We're talking about adding 4 native trees and 93 shrubs, along with 250 plugs of bearberry and a significant amount of beach grass to be replanted to the west of the dwelling. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions about the mitigation, restoration, vegetation management plan.
Thank you. Amy, any comments on the plan?
The plant species and numbers and choice look good. There are things that should be in this area. They will enhance diversity and habitat, and I don't really view it as mitigation, actually, as this mitigation as so much as is restoration, because it is so highly invaded. I have no comments. It's a good plan.
Mhm. John, any comments on this plan?
No.
None. Carol?
Nope.
Stan?
Almost.
Good.
Just to clarify, the green shaded area, is that essentially gonna be sand
It is, yes.
planted with?
With beach grass, yep, and we are proposing just to provide a roll-up boardwalk, just to have access for maintenance purposes around the house. It could be removed seasonally as necessary.
That's all.
That's all? Got a couple questions. So, under the existing deck, the deck will be elevated. What type of substrate will be found there with the deck up?
Sand.
Just sand?
Well, I guess the question is up to the breakaway panels, and then the decision to be, adjusted about whether the breakaway panels will remain under the deck.
Right.
Yeah, but
Would-
sand would be allowed up to the edge of that.
Wouldn't there be a benefit to plant beach grass?
We could certainly do that, absolutely.
Try to get that dune to
Yes.
expand.
Yes, absolutely, we could do that. I think we were just trying to provide a little area for access and circulation around the house, basically for maintenance, but we could certainly plant beach grass in that area.
Right. I've already expressed that interest, but I think to me that's a real important part of this. You don't have an obligation to restore that dune. It's an opportunity.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%.
So, whether it's a 5 feet gain, a 10-foot gain, I think that would be fantastic to have that chance to gain something on that edge. Otherwise, the planting plan, I think looks good. Mixed in with the invasives, there are, beach plum, like there's bayberry.
Yes.
It's not 100% invasives. and
No.
It'd be nice to have the outcome, have that real natural
Exactly.
beach look
Yep.
with those species. I can't really judge whether your densities will allow that to happen over time, but I think Amy has a good sense of that.
Yeah.
But red cedars, bayberries, beach plums, those are the plants that
Good
look good
things.
Yep.
in that area.
Yeah, and we are proposing hand management of this area because there are really good native
things.
species in there that we want to protect.
Yep. And I guess that red cedar that's looking pretty lousy right now, that's gonna come out?
Unfortunately, cedar does not regenerate, so even if we were to remove the vine material from it, it would just continue to
Yep.
That's the
degrade.
picture of
That's
this.
the picture of it
Yeah.
there, yeah.
Is
Yeah.
there any reason why we can't have a red cedar or two put in on that?
We could, it's awfully close to the house. My recommendation, if we were gonna put a cedar in there, would be to put it in an extremely small size, something like a 2 to 5 gallon size, so maybe a couple of feet tall, and just let it naturalize over time. Putting something larger in such an exposed area would be very difficult. We would likely lose the cedars. So we find that if we do plant in an area that's as exposed as this, if we put in small northern grown cedars, once we start getting larger cedars, they're generally brought up from Georgia, and we put them into this kind of conditions and they just give up immediately.
Yep.
So we could certainly do that, absolutely.
Okay. I think what I'll also do is, when you come back, I'll put a little more time into just looking at some of the densities and just thinking about.
Yeah.
Certainly it looks really good.
Yeah.
I'd just like to just think about that a little bit more in
Sure.
regards to things like red cedar.
Yep. Yeah, our proposal to put the red cedar in the area of the shuffleboard is to kind of build upon what's happening in the abutting property and to create a cedar grove in that area where it's not quite as exposed, a little bit more protected by the structure in front of it.
Okay. Anything else we need to ask?
Do you want an elevation picture of the southwest side of the house? The southwest side is where this dune is located, and we have no idea how extensive that deck is,
Yes, I'm gonna
because that's
reach out
the
to the
space that
architect
would be cut.
to update her. These were prepared before the site plan was prepared, so this was to sell the house to the applicant. I don't want to put it that way, but
No.
that's the way it came out. So I will have her redo the elevations and give you all 4 elevations.
Thank you.
And I'll probably do a section through the house, north to south, out through the dune, to show you what the
That'd be great.
final grades will look like.
One question to clarify, the breakaway panels, are they at the perimeter of the deck or the dwelling?
The architect shows them on the perimeter of the deck.
Yeah, that's what I understood.
And I'll speak to her about possibly moving that into the footprint of the house, which would open up the whole underside of the
Yeah, I
deck.
think we'd all look favorably on that.
I just have one other question, which is where you started showing the photos of the installation of the pilings with a pretty big-looking machine screwing those things in, and the space in that property is so constrained. And you're not showing work limits or anything here. Is there really room to get that thing in there and
It's
keep it
a
away
small skid steer. And so, a bobcat, basically, with a auger attachment. Not an auger attachment, it's basically a hydraulic motor that turns these helical screws into the ground. And so, the bobcat's really not all that big. The other alternative to helical screws are wooden piles, 10-inch, 12-inch wooden piles, and
You need a big machine for that,
need
right?
a very large machine.
I see,
And
okay.
so this is, what we found is the helical screws are the least intrusive way to get this done. And they'll start at the water side and move their way back, but they don't, they can turn on a dime, so there's no reason for that machine to be tracking all over the property. They can stay within, I would say, 5 feet of the footprint all the way around.
The plan doesn't show the limit of work, but it is staked out on the site. I don't see, maybe.
It's tough to see. It's
okay.
it's that line with the triangles.
Oh, okay, I thought that was your bank line, okay. Did I see it labeled?
Yeah, all right.
All right,
Okay.
but it's very tight. Sorry if I didn't catch that.
And just to be clear, Amy, the flood improvements are really requirements from FEMA, given what they want to do with the property.
Correct.
So it's really, it's a really good benefit, but it's not something coming through our regulations, the Wetlands Protection Act.
It is in that it's land subject to coastal storm flowage, so it basically, you just have to meet the FEMA flood regulations and the town, building code regulations, for it, but it is land subject to coastal storm flowage. Doesn't have a lot of performance standards, but it does. But it is there. Oh, you can't really have an adverse impact to your butter or resource and whatnot. But, it basically defers to the building code. But it is our jurisdiction.
Right. So, the vegetation plan is gonna be a benefit, the flood protection is
Yep.
gonna be a benefit, but for our regulations, what I see, as a potential benefit here is to try to improve that front dune, try to get human impact on that dune reduced. It doesn't have to be done, but to expand beyond the footprint of the existing building, I think it's probably the right thing to do.
I hear you, and I've got some ideas already, and I'll run it by the architect
Super.
and work with Teresa.
All right, thank you for that. All right, when do you wanna come back?
2 weeks is probably too soon.
January
I'm gonna be
2nd.
gone
Yeah.
I'm gonna be gone from the 18th to the 2nd, so it would be after that
So-
for me to come back. But Emma could certainly come back and present if I'm not
I would say the second meeting in January.
That would be ideal.
So that should be this 16th, I believe, because we meet the 2nd, which is the first Wednesday, so it should be the 16th of January,
Okay.
if you want
I
that.
don't want to be here on the 7th.
So, all right, January 16th. If it's a different date, I'll let you know, but that's what we'll put down.
That's what I have on my calendar.
All right.
Okay, well, I move we continue to January 16th.
Oh, second?
Second that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you very much.
So we're gonna continue the King property as well?
Yeah, so if you want to just read it, that would be
Okay.
good, and then I'll talk.
Next, we have a notice of intent for the King property at 30 Lopeth Avenue, construction of a wood deck at the back of the house, minor alterations to eliminate water from entering the basement entry.
Mhm.
We have a request to continue with no date certain, right?
Yes, no, they would like to continue until, I believe, March 20th, or however, I had a chance to speak with their representative before the meeting, Paul Shea, who was here for another hearing, and I think with all the continuances we've been giving, I don't think, it's not my recommendation to continue to a date certain right now.
Okay.
I would, and he said that would be fine for an indefinite continuance. I mean, he spoke for his applicant. And that way, when they are ready to come back, that they have to re-notify abutters. They have to physically give us, new information and whatnot. And we'll put it in the paper and all of that. So it puts a little bit of pressure, if you will, on as well, in terms of, you just can't continue without any new information. It's when they have new information, they come back to us. So I would recommend an indefinite continuance
Okay.
for the King property.
All right, well,
I'll make a motion to indefinitely continue the project at 30 Lothrop Avenue for Jeffrey King.
Second.
second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, none opposed.
All right, we got another continuance before the orders, too.
Okay, so the next is a notice of intent for the Value property of 85 Sequoia Road, bulkhead and boathouse reconstruction, dock construction, access path, stair relocation, tree cutting, and site restoration. This hearing was continued previously, and the proponent is asked to continue again until December 19th.
They're waiting to hear back from Heritage, so
Okay,
hopefully they'll hear back by the 19th.
all right.
Okay, I'll make a motion to continue the hearing for 85 Sequantum Road.
I second it.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, none opposed. A lot of continuances tonight.
I know. Not good.
And do some orders of conditions?
Sure.
We'll do the amended order for 11 Shore Road, Lupoli first. Very few changes.
Amy, number 18, second line, an 8% survival rate of new native plants must have been achieved.
Oops, Katie. Why do I not?
You only about enough,
I hope so.
Hold on, I'm not.
It's a lot of money.
Why do I
Number
not?
14,
Oh, 14, I thought you said 18.
14, second
Yeah,
line,
it should have been.
80.
Yeah, that was already, we can fix that, but that was already in the previous document.
And
It's
we
the
didn't
only
pick it
thing-
up?
And I didn't pick it up, but I will change it. I don't think that's gonna be an issue. Should be 80. That's minimum. The only new things are the first page, the plan dates and whatnot have changed. And then this last page of the special conditions as amended. They did get me the revised calculations, which did match up. If you want to see them, I'm happy to show them to you. I just got them last night. Because there was a concern that it looked like there was an expansion, but it's because in one place they counted the stairs and the platform, another place they didn't. It all works.
Okay.
But, and I just elaborated on a condition about fertilization and put in our typical language that we've kind of been adopting.
Is that for 3?
Number 2 as amended? Next page, Brad. Those special conditions can't change, but the amended ones can. It actually should say this condition is to remain in perpetuity and shall not be released as a certificate of compliance. Number 2.
Yep. That's what Jim kind
Yep.
of put forth last time.
Yep.
Some good boilerplate language. Looks great.
Now I'm looking at the special conditions that, as you said, we can't change them anyway, but I don't remember, and maybe I just forgot, that we agreed that the existing irrigation system could be replaced.
It can't be expanded upon. That's been our typical.
Can't be expanded upon, but
Right.
it can be replaced.
If it's existing, we haven't been telling people they can't have it.
Right.
But have we been telling them they could put in a new and improved system? Well,
Well,
new and
it doesn't
improved would
expand the
probably be
footprint.
better.
Right.
Well, yeah. We've asked if it was permitted in the past, and that's sometimes hard to demonstrate, but if it's pre-existing,
Yeah.
we've,
I don't think water necessarily is too bad, but what usually comes with the water is what's not so good.
Okay.
But yeah, we typically, if they have an existing, we just won't let them have a bigger one. Any other questions on the Poli?
Everyone good with this one?
Yep.
All right, let's have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the order of conditions for 11 Shore Road.
Second?
Second by Mark. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion
Should we
carries.
sign?
None opposed.
Go to 20 Chase Street.
I wonder if number 12, you want to add a date for that mitigation plan, just to document the date. Does that make sense, or is that too much?
Mitigation.
Is that more detail than is necessary?
Sorry. Mitigation plan
Instead of
approved by.
as the construction of the house.
No, for number 12, just add the date of the plan.
Oh, it's on the first page.
It is.
Yeah, mitigation plan, revised November 20th, 2018.
That's fine.
Yeah, so the first page is all like the plans of record, that way
Yeah.
during my on-sites, I make sure that they have the right ones on site.
Yep, it's right there. Any reason for the different survival rate?
I was just gonna ask that.
I think we should bump it up, honestly.
Arbitrary,
Well, no,
having
I
80 at
think,
one and 90 at
um,
another?
yeah, the 80 was, I mean, that was last year, but I think between 80 and 90 is good, I think.
I've seen 90 quite a bit.
Yeah, I think
I've also
it's-
seen 90 fail, you know.
Right. If it doesn't work, then they should come back to us with proposed
Yeah.
different types of plants, and that's, but,
Yeah.
it's pretty consistent across the towns. I don't think we have a, maybe in our next revision to our regulations, we set a survival rate in the regs, but
Yeah.
I just went with what I've seen other towns do.
I've seen a lot of 90s, but if you have 10 plants and one die, that you're at it.
Well, you just make them replant it. I mean, it's so essentially just, you wanna make them give a good faith effort to replant and,
I'm trying to remember, even though I was abstaining on voting for it, I can still sign the order.
yes. You don't need to, we have enough signatures. Actually, if you have a conflict, you shouldn't sign it, if we have enough signatures.
No, I'm just trying to think of that, because, you know,
Yeah, you
sometimes we
shouldn't.
do these automatically.
Yeah, I should be a little more careful and tell people who shouldn't sign. If you have and I know your situation here, you shouldn't sign it.
Amy, one comment on the lawn thing that I know we're honing in on.
Yep.
Where it says shall be natural, I wonder if we should word that a little bit differently, because that's not a descriptive word particularly.
Shall be of native grasses.
Yeah, I think that'd be much better.
Okay.
Anyone ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the order of conditions for 20 Chase Street.
Second.
Seconded by Jim. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
All right. Everybody,
One
everybody
abstention.
but Stan.
Yep.
No, I question that, because I think of some of these when we're doing these automatically at the end now, and I'm trying to remember which one is this?
Right,
one?
right, right.
Is it-
It says the same deal on number 9. The
51 Saquatucket Bluffs.
Bluffs lawn area shall be
I'll
native
change it.
grasses.
I'll change it. Okay. Oh, I hope you didn't come all the way back for that. You're still here. Thank you.
I have no comments for that one.
So is it the same issue about natural lawn?
Yeah, I changed it to native grasses. I'll just make that consistent from now on. Anybody else? I'm freezing.
It's getting cold outside.
Oh,
Folks ready
It's
to move on
officially
this one?
winter yet.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the order of conditions for Charles and Maria Dickinson, 51 Saquatucket Bluffs Road.
I second it.
Seconded by Stan. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Here it
No one
comes.
opposed.
Feels like all of a sudden it's winter.
Isn't that how it happens every year?
Well, we had a touch of it like earlier in the month, but then it got warm. I've been playing outside. All right, 99 Riverside. I probably have the same problem.
I don't think we have anything in there on the lawn.
No, because there's no lawn change there, other than, well, no, what it's made of, other than condition number 8 to stop the chemical application essentially on that.
This is the one with the revetment repair.
No, this is Lang. This is the big addition with the boat where there's a house, and then down the hill there's a boathouse.
Tons
Right
of
on
invasive plant removal.
Invasive plant removal on Riverside Drive.
On the west side of the Herring River.
Yeah.
The night boathouse right on the river.
Right, yeah, yeah.
That boathouse is interesting. It has Chapter 91 requirements to let people walk over the
Yeah.
property. If they're clamming, you can go up the steps and walk over the property and go back down the steps
Yep.
on the other side, which is funny because who ever
They
goes
don't,
there? Yeah,
but it's a requirement.
yeah.
Neat property.
So that's a question. So this is primarily existing lawn,
Yes.
as I remember.
So they're not required to convert the species, but they should stop the chemical
Right.
application on it.
Mhm.
And the owner was here for the 2 hearings, so he heard us loud and clear on that one.
Right. I'm just wondering if any language should be in the any reseeding should be with
Yeah,
native.
that's
could
why I was
put that
just
in,
wondering, and I wonder if that should be just an automatic, like along with
That's
the
another
no
good one, mhm.
pesticides, herbicides,
Any
any
reseeding.
any new lawn.
Any
So
reseeding.
eventually, even a lawn planted with, a turf lawn will naturalize automatically. So with that language in there, any lawns we see years down the line should essentially be naturalized.
Transition.
You should see clover, you should see.
However, one way to manage a lawn with no chemical application is annual overseeding. And I believe that's the case,
Yeah,
and that
okay.
would be a way to suppress the diversification. You probably don't eliminate it,
Well,
but suppress the diversity of what grows in there eventually. So if you specify not just any reseeding, but any overseeding, which I think that is a real distinction, because you don't necessarily have to have a bare piece of lawn that you're gonna reseed.
Yeah,
Just,
that's what I mean by that, is any seeding of any kind.
Yeah, Doesn't that number 8 apply to more than just lawn? I mean, it applies to where they're removing that English ivy. And so some of those areas, we don't want it seeded. I mean,
Right.
No,
Well,
it's just saying.
Lawn
any-
areas, I said.
say that?
I'm putting it in now.
Yeah, so.
All right.
Yep.
So we're kind of looking for two standard lawn languages. One is for, I don't know, do there need to be two?
We should get in our regs. Next time.
Maybe there only needs to be one, but any,
Reseeding or overseeding of the lawn shall be with native grasses.
yeah.
Okay. We have a motion to accept this order?
I'll make a motion to accept the order of conditions on 99 Riverside Drive.
I'll second.
Seconded by Carolyn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unopposed? Motion carries. Okay.
Now what?
Certificates of compliance. Jane Sugden. Replacement of pier, ramp, and bulkhead. It was an in-kind replacement. It was one of my first ones, probably the first year of my job here. Let me make sure. Something.
Quick question on that one. Was there an as-built?
That's what I'm looking for. I don't see one. She's recommending a certificate of compliance, but we don't have the as-built yet, as far as I can see. Let me just take a quick look. So, I would recommend holding off if that's the case. I don't see one. So I recommend we'll just put it on the next meeting and I'll get some more information for you, if there is one. Sound like a plan?
Okay.
So no action on that one? The next one, actually, both Nikki and I visited because we didn't talk to each other and we both went to the site. I did it because it was like a pre-application for a cert of compliance meeting. Dennis Murphy, he was removing some trees to install some solar panels. Very, very highly vegetated, naturally vegetated area, with the exception of a little bit of front lawn. He has no lawn. So the commission allowed him to take some trees down in also to do some replanting of some native shrubs. And I visited the native plants. You can't even tell that they were planted. I know they were planted because you can kind of tell, but it's hard to tell. They've naturalized so well. The only thing is, and both Nikki and I have spoke with him actually, is he is storing some ladders in the 50-foot buffer. So he did say he would be moving those, and we'll just check up with him on that. But everything looks good. The removal was good. There was no stump grinding. He replanted. He did this a while ago. It's just we reminded him with the letter that he was due for a certificate of compliance. So recommend a cert for Mr. Murphy at 293 Long Pond.
Any comments? All right. I move that we approve the certificate of compliance for 293 Long Pond.
Second?
Second that, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries, none opposed.
Jim seconded, was it?
Yeah.
I know we go back and look at the tapes, but sometimes it's nice just to have the notes. Before we talk about management, I just stuck it on there in case we wanted to chat about it. But maybe we'll do the minutes first. Oh, actually, first, I'm sorry, Nikki reminded me of this. We issued an extension permit for Keith O'Donnell on Sugar Hill Drive like a month or two ago. We needed a new signature page though. I don't know what happened to I think we sent it to the address that we had for him, but he didn't change his mailing address with us, and it got lost. So, if you wouldn't mind re-signing the extension permit for Mr. O'Donnell, that would be helpful.
When was this?
Oh,
Did I sign
probably.
it? I don't remember.
Yeah, I think you did.
That's the one along the river.
Because he did it,
26.
no, it wasn't 2016.
Yeah, right.
It was, you can sign it anyways, but
All right,
it
I'll
was
sign
within
it.
the past few months.
I don't care.
Isn't that the one
On Herring
Muddy
Road,
Creek?
or Muddy
Sugar
Creek.
Hill,
Yep.
Muddy Creek, and he's got the
Yeah,
engineering and all that
yes,
going on.
exactly. He's saying that there's some adverse impact and whatnot. The page got lost in somewhere. Okay. We have one set of minutes, July 5th. Trying to help
Third
Nikki catch
page.
up.
Under the Turner Strandway paragraph, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Is that a specific kind of license, license, or is it a license?
It should be
That's what I thought. That was all I found.
Just the one below that, same page, the Novak, Third High Road. There's a sentence that says dredging has been done in the past in this area. Now, Mark Burgess suggested that. Did you listen to the minutes and
I didn't.
was there evidence offered? Because my recollection was he just threw that out there, and there was no evidence offered other than a photograph.
You want to just strike that
I'd
line?
like to strike the sentence, yeah. A photograph
I didn't listen to it.
of
We
a
can
boat in
strike
that
that.
location, 1949, is not evidence that dredging.
Yeah,
Even
no.
in 49, dredging would need a permit.
Right. If there was no evidence, I mean, I don't think we need to keep it.
Right. There was a lot said that particular hearing.
They're coming back.
Oh, with that one? Oh, boy.
Harbor,
I told you,
Yeah.
Harbor Way,
Hey,
Novak.
we
I believe
denied
they're
it, we did
coming
not
back.
deny it. It just was
They
withdrawn.
They
withdrew.
withdrew
Right.
without prejudice.
Yeah.
right.
And
No,
they
you said
withdrew
today
with
we denied it.
smiles.
No, we voted against it, and then there was gonna be a second vote to deny it,
Yeah,
and we didn't do it because they withdrew it.
right,
That's what I said today.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Took us a while to get that straight today.
No kidding.
Are they already on the,
I don't know, I think they might be on the next one.
Oh, boy.
I see.
Be fun before Christmas. I think we have a decent agenda next time.
yeah, it seems
I'll try
like
to do some baking.
the regulations we were trying to enforce weren't clear enough. I was hoping we'd get a chance to revisit them before another proposal came in.
Yeah.
But For what, for shellfish? I think it's pretty clear for that one.
Well,
It's significant shellfish habitat.
yeah, I thought so too, but it doesn't seem clear enough for,
Everybody.
everybody.
We don't all
Clear
have
for
to
me.
agree.
Okay, that's all I had.
Everyone else good with July 5th?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for Wednesday, July 5th. With the
Yeah, I'll make the
changes
changes.
we
Mhm.
proposed.
I'll second that. And all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Just thought we could chat a little bit. It's nothing, I didn't put anything in your packets, I didn't have a chance to get to it. But I wanted to revisit some things, soon regarding management of conservation lands, and that's just kind of a broad topic. One, the community gardens, in terms of if we want to, release, or if we want to lease out that northern section. I know some people still wanted to get, who couldn't go when I went, wanted to go down there and take a look at that area. I'm planning on taking, the invasive woody vegetation out this fall, but just want to see, remind people if we could maybe put it on for next meeting, take a ride out there, take a look. We do have some people who are interested in that area.
In leasing the area?
In leasing it, yep,
For what purpose?
to farm, for,
Oh,
Pro-
okay,
produce.
that field, that other side of
the,
it, yeah.
yeah, the field area. Either for, just, you could lease for agricultural purposes, either for vegetable farming or, animal grazing. I've heard some people are interested in stuff like that, but
Do you
would,
happen, I'm sorry, do you happen to
How about
recall
storing
the
lobster?
last time that was,
No.
What I was,
not for conservation. Huh?
last time that property was used, it was fenced?
Right.
And do you happen to know if it was the responsibility of that individual to remove the fence
I
after the
don't.
fact?
I don't.
Was that before you?
That was before me.
I thought so.
If it needs to be removed, we can get it removed.
Could be helpful in this
Was it a lease back then, Mark?
I don't know whether it was a lease. I don't know what the,
It was grazed on.
it was grazed on, because
Um,
Lindsay had
yeah, Lindsay, yeah,
sheep down there.
right.
Oh,
But
really?
I don't know,
I don't know if it was his, I don't know
I
whose
don't,
it is.
I have no idea.
Um,
It didn't hurt anything.
no, and actually, I like the fence because it keeps the gardeners and other people just love to drive into the community gardens and drive around. We get some dumping. Actually, the
really?
fence keeps people out of that nice field. So, and it's just like a wire fence, it's nothing major.
Well, if it doesn't get mowed periodically, it's not gonna stay a field.
Exactly, so we're either gonna, it needs to be mowed regardless, and the town has a big mower deck. But with the woody vegetation, especially the autumn olive in there, which I hope to take out this year, if we don't start managing it as a field, we're not gonna keep it as a field. So, we could graze it, we could grow vegetables, I could just remove the invasives, and the town could start mowing it like we do Thompson's Field and Texera, but I think we need to give it a little attention.
Just got a few goats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kinda like the idea of grazing. I don't see anything harmful with that.
Yeah.
A lot of that property is not being used right now, the actual garden plots, and they're just so covered
I know.
with invasives. So to me, it'd be, to manage it properly, I think that should be addressed first.
Mhm.
And that'd be a good place to grow vegetables.
Mhm.
And then kind of, once that's all
Yeah.
under control, maybe consider expanding into that field, which is, excellent habitat, and there's really not many invasives. And
No. wanna keep it
but
that way.
grazing is kind of just a natural,
Mhm.
as long as it's not overgrazed, is
Right.
a natural way of maintaining that, which would be good. I remember when they had goats in there, what was that, 15 years ago or so?
Do you think there
Sheep,
would be
actually.
Sheep, yeah.
demand for that? I mean, are there,
I don't think I'd even recommend if it was just grazing, I wouldn't recommend even charging for it, it's a service for us. If they were going to, you could, but I think
Yeah,
it's a
but-
service to our land, but if it was to be farmed, then yes, you lease it.
Yeah, I do have concerns with the, you know,
Yeah,
I think you want
tearing everything out.
yeah.
some sort of a payment, be it $5 or whatever, just to, you've got your legal contract.
Oh, sure, we could do an agreement, yeah, it doesn't
You
even,
don't want to be responsible
need
for
money.
their goats.
yeah. If you were in favor of maybe letting it get grazed, we could come up with a contract.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have to be any money, but just a contract. And then,
It would still have to be bid, right? It would have to go out. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's exclusive use, I think it should be bid.
yep, no, it would go out and see what interest there was.
Could it be done under a licensing agreement?
I don't know the answer to that.
I'd
don't
have to
either.
ask
I mean,
council or
I
the
would think that
administration.
in fairness, that it should be bid,
Oh, yeah,
and that let the person choose whether they wanna have a $10, fee or something, or, if it's exclusive use, it seems to me that
of
it should.
town land, correct.
Yeah, it needs to be fairly
Right,
advertised for opportunity.
right.
And maybe you just do it for 1 year, you do it one time, essentially. So, and see how it goes.
It's tough. You could find the perfect person for that without going to bid, but then that is,
Yeah, we just-
can you even select somebody that way? I don't even know if you can.
I mean, the whole bid process, it has to do with dollar amount and value, and the value determines which level of
Value is very small.
notification,
Yeah.
what level of notification you have to kind of put out for public. But we want to do things the right way, so
Yeah.
I'll ask around a little bit. But I agree, we have to start managing the rest of the gardens. We have, about 5 years ago, so we had a full garden, 100 spots were all full. And that was also before Chatham had a community garden, and a large number of people actually came from Chatham to our garden. Chatham opened up and we saw like a mass exodus, and now we have plenty of spots left. So tell your friends. But we do get this kind of checkerboard now, and we get it tilled every year, and we mow it, the spots that haven't gotten used at the end of the season. But there are a lot of weeds, weed seeds coming in there.
Yeah, I just would like to see that managed before.
I'm trying to
opening up.
consolidate, right, well, the person who's interested in farming is looking for a larger scale.
Right.
The southern plots, I gave them away, the six plots down there that were kind of damp all the time, and somebody was interested in them, like, doing a larger scale thing, and I said, you can just have them for the year, whatever you make of it, and you didn't do anything.
No one did, yeah, that's what I noticed. But there is
Besides bringing a bunch of horse manure, which contributed to the weed problem.
Right, yeah, that's probably where I saw the 8-foot tall weeds in there, but, there's some land there that, some
There
growing
is.
could be done.
We are trying to consolidate farmers as much as we can this year. Everyone wants the periphery, nobody wants interior. But we're trying to get more perennial plots, because that's what the sentiment of the gardeners is down there. They don't want their plots tilled, they wanna leave their fence up year round. It was completely different 5-10 years ago. Every one of their plots tilled, and they didn't mind taking their fence down.
We talked about raising the prices like 7 years ago because
We did raise.
demand was so high.
We raised them $5.
Yeah.
I mean, now I think it's $40. We barely cover the cost of water, but it's not supposed to be a money-making enterprise. It's just, if we keep our costs even, then we're good. How about the bogs at the Bell's Neck? I still haven't gotten people out there. I need to do that.
Yeah, it should be on a list of properties to manage.
Yeah.
We need to have some plan.
Yeah.
So,
We need to have a plan first. I mean, I don't want to go in and, other than invasives, I could, remove those, but I don't want to take out woody vegetation. Without having a plan, I don't want to do anything down there.
Yeah, and continuing to monitor it, it seems like most of the water is migrating underground, or just in the little dike built up between the reservoir and the bog.
Mm-hmm.
When you look, there's just a tiny trickle coming in
Mm-hmm.
on the inflow.
Yeah,
And
there's a lot of
significant
underground
amount,
seep.
you know, it's like a small stream coming out the outflow.
Yeah.
So that could probably just be filled with gravel or something if it's not being, either way, really.
What would be filled with gravel?
The inflow, or filled.
If we're
with-
not gonna do anything.
Yeah.
The dike to supply that whole thing?
The culvert, yeah. I don't think it would make much difference in the level of water in the bog.
Well, that comes down to the fact if you want to maintain it as a bog.
Right,
And I'm very adamant about the fact that it should be.
right.
Now, there's some opposition to that, but I highly disagree.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a degree of viability in part of it. I find it a little bit upsetting to see that it's being overlooked and just let it go. Conservation is not being responsible by not acting on it.
So what, that's a desire, but what would you suggest we actually do to achieve that goal?
We did put it out for
Right.
a bid and withdrew.
I would advocate we plan to naturalize it. That'd be my approach. But I'm one vote among several, so, but I think we.
It's not officially on the agenda tonight. This is just a discussion to start it again, because it's been a while. And also, it's getting to be winter, and, sorry, John. And I want to know if we should be,
We should have it as an
flooding
agenda item on a light.
all right,
Probably should line up several properties
yeah.
and have some good discussion on them. You know, we haven't really talked about properties in some time, so yeah, I do agree to one thing with you, Mark. The public's curious what we're gonna do.
Yep.
I do get feedback.
I think we need to
both
make
sides
a
of the issue.
decision.
So I think the public's wondering what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And if we wait 10 years and there's pines all over the place, people are gonna say,
Too
well,
late.
you know, what'd you do? So we have a responsibility to
Mhm.
do something.
I totally agree, Brett.
What were you gonna say, John?
Just a question, is there any possibility of cultivating anything other than cranberries on that property?
Possibility exists,
Yep.
but to go into something like that, the individual would have to be willing to invest a lot of money for a long time, because you're a number of years before there'd be any return.
Yeah. That cranberry mat is,
So you're saying it's not likely there would be any takers for such a proposition, so, I mean,
Correct.
that's what that means, right?
Correct.
And if you
are
can
in
look for an
favor of-
agenda where it'll fit,
okay.
that'd be great. And, so I think that's, anything else folks have for tonight?
Are there any other, what other properties are under our control that are currently leased?
Great Swamp Bog.
And that's
Is that
one
the only one?
I've been curious about
I
that.
think so.
Because is there any active cranberry growing going on there?
Well, it was kind of mentioned here today. I need to chat with the lessee because I believe they have paid up as if they're, you know, paid up through their lease.
Yeah.
But I don't know when they
I've been
produced last.
curious about that property because there doesn't appear to be any cranberry growing, but there appears to be a lot of vehicles on the property, maybe even a couple dozen,
Yeah,
like maybe not registered vehicles.
okay.
Where is
That's
the Great
just
Swamp
kinda,
Bog?
Northwest Harwich.
Observation from driving by that there's the old buildings there, and that's the one off Main Street, right?
No,
It's-
that's no, Great Swamp
no.
is,
I might be. thinking
Robbins
about-
Pond area,
yeah,
That's,
behind Robbins Pond,
behind Robbins Pond in
that's
Northwest
Leo's,
Harwich.
right?
yes.
It is Leo's lease,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Okay, now I'm thinking about the one off.
On Main Street?
Look,
That's his. I don't think that's leased by us at all, but I will double check.
isn't that town conservation land? Yeah, I believe.
That was leased in the past. I don't know the status right now.
I'll check. I know it's where he usually had an old wagon that he used to sell out of there, across, near Deacon's Folly, across from
He's
Deacon's
had
Folly
that
Road.
leased from the
On
town for
Old,
quite some
what's it
time.
called, Old Main
And it's
Street?
always been my
Old Main
understanding
Street.
that it was
Um,
under
think
the
I know what you're
jurisdiction
talking
of
about.
yeah, so to the north of it is
Is,
Flax
certainly.
Pond and like the
Robbins Pond one
The,
is
dump
definitely.
Yes.
property.
And,
So
Okay,
10-year lease last time I saw.
40-acre town conservation property that's mostly cranberry
Does
bogs.
anybody ever look at it?
You know, we probably
It's
should
not,
really
it's
consider.
kind of,
Well,
You
I
know,
think.
hidden.
it's still
backtrack.
Kukunis.
I believe it is.
Yeah.
Examine it.
Yeah.
Right. Look at the conditions of the lease, see if
But,
they're being met, and then think about what's good for the town moving forward.
I can't really tell whether he's harvested
all
or
the
not
properties.
recently, but there's
Right.
a lot going on there.
I went there last year, if it's the bog I'm thinking, and he dry picked it last year,
Yeah. It could still
but not
be
the entire thing.
getting dry picked.
But yeah, not the whole thing, he hasn't. I don't believe. I'll double check.
I see, right.
And those properties
So
at
yeah,
that
Great Swamp
point are-
Bog is up there,
Right.
but he's
It's
talking about,
Cocoons.
on Main Street.
That property is
So
still
Cocoons.
open to the public for
Main Street or Great Western?
that point.
Main Street, Great Western is Thatcher. I believe.
Oh. Yeah,
But the
right.
question, I mean, is that property
Yeah.
still open to the public at that point?
Let me ask.
Yeah,
Um,
not really sure.
With a lease agreement, there is some language where, public cannot interfere with the operation, but I don't know. That's one that I'm not as familiar with in that
Yeah.
area, but I'll have to look at it more.
Yeah, I was just kind of surprised to learn that it was town conservation land
Yeah.
under the jurisdiction of the commission,
Mm-hmm,
and with the amount of just vehicles on the
Mhm.
property, and then it could still be getting dry picked, but it's showing signs of not being
Yep.
actively cultivated, basically.
I'll
Were you
take a
here,
look.
Jim, when we reviewed the proposal to lease the Bell's Neck bog?
Yes.
Yeah, so the town council prepared a summary of all the existing leases, so we were given that document.
Oh, okay.
That's a good summary to look at.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah.
Can you,
We should look at that again and then just think about
I
all these
will,
places.
I will
I
again.
guess I may
Now that
not
we're
have been here when
resurrecting
that-
this conversation, I will email
Sorry.
that out.
I
Yeah.
was here when the proposals came.
That was a good summary, but I forget the details.
I'll send it back out.
Would there be any interest in getting the agricultural commission involved with the agricultural leases for the town?
Not for conservation land, from me anyways. I think that's our purview, that's our responsibility. If they could review, say we were going to,
Farm plan or something.
yeah, if we were gonna have a lease that went out to bid, to have them review it,
Mhm.
that's fine. But the management, I would personally feel like that's our responsibility. Those lands are under our care and custody. And,
Well, I guess my point is, I don't think we're doing a good job at it. And perhaps it's an opportunity to take something off the plate and put it in a situation where it could be dealt with better.
yes.
Because it's still gonna be under conservation jurisdiction, no matter what.
Yeah,
That these properties don't necessarily need to be farmed. That's up to the Conservation Commission to decide whether they would be farmed or not farmed, or, so.
yeah.
I guess that's the stumbling block that I've got.
I know, well, it's,
think
yeah,
that's
we're,
the main issue, is
yeah,
whether or
no.
not they're gonna be farmed, and
Let them all naturalize. I'm way out there, Thompson's Field, let it naturalize, let them all naturalize.
Do you remember when they
you know?
grew strawberries over there?
Yeah, we used to hang out there all the time. Dirt bikes, fires, drinking beer, the whole bit. Are we still on tape?
Yep.
Probably. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
In your younger days.
Do we have a second for that emotion?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Are we off tape now?
5 minutes ago.
No.
okay, so what was
Hold
it we used to
on,
do
wait a
over there?
minute, wait.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
Skip day?
skip
I was
day.
telling my son a couple of years ago that we had that hearing on Thompson's Field, and I'm like, you probably have never been there, and he's like, oh, yes, I have, Mom, cars before they put up the fences.
Yeah.